Chapter 2208. Explain? Now that Li Jianyue was here, was it still his turn to explain? Looking at them, they seemed to know Li Jianyue very well. Yang Ziheo's heart raced. He pinched the hem of his school uniform and wanted to look at Li Jianyue, but he couldn't lift his head. Quan Jingqing frowned unhappily when he heard the dean's words. He turned to look at Yang Ziheo and his parents who were standing behind him. Since my son didn't bully your son, doesn't that mean your son is lying? Shouldn't you seek justice for my son as well? He said. When Yang Ziheo's parents heard this, they said, if it's really like what this female student said, then we will certainly make our son apologize. But my son would never do such a thing. Yang Ziheo had been an obedient boy since he was young. How could he bully his classmates? How could he lie? The one who lied was definitely that delinquent. It couldn't be their son. Yang Ziheo's parents were very confident. They were also very confident in their child. Li Jianyue was angered by their attitude and said, but this is what I saw. Would I cover up for Quan Jingyi to bully another student? But, Yang Ziheo suddenly spoke. He didn't lift his head. He pinched the hem of his school uniform and said, you like Quan Jingyi, don't you? When Li Jianyue heard this, she couldn't believe it. What nonsense are you talking about? Yang Ziheo pinched the hem of his shirt. When he thought about how he had been blacklisted on WeChat, he felt terrible. He decided to go all out. He gritted his teeth and said, you know it yourself. Everyone in the class is saying that you like Quan Jingyi. If that wasn't the case, why would you come here and say such things? Li Jianyue was furious. She clenched her fists and said, nonsense. How could I? Enough. Quan Jingyi looked at Yang Ziheo coldly. This is embarrassing, student Yang. The courage that Yang Ziheo had mustered up was like a balloon that had been poked. It collapsed in an instant. His face flushed red. He looked up at Quan Jingyi and realized that he was looking at him with an ugly expression. Quan Jingyi said, I didn't intend to hold it against you, so I didn't bother to explain. But you just had to step on my bottom line. Yang Ziheo's heartbeat quickened. Fear and nervousness flashed across his face. He stammered. We all know what the truth is. I don't want to argue with you, so don't pester me, Quan Jingyi said openly. If I did it, I won't deny it. But if I didn't do it, I won't apologize. Classmate Yang, Li Jianyue only came to explain to me out of goodwill. You don't have to drag her down with you. After all, you wrote her a love letter. Love letter? This was the director's office. The teachers and parents were all present. Hearing these two key words, the parents' faces changed slightly. Yang Ziheo was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He immediately jumped up and shouted, I didn't. Don't talk nonsense. Li Jianyue was also confused. Wasn't it his friend who wrote her the love letter? How did it become this person? Quan Jingyi sneered. You know very well whether I'm talking nonsense or not. Chapter 2209. How did I threaten a classmate? Quan Jingyi raised his eyebrows. I was just communicating normally with student Yang. Is that a threat? Why is the threshold for threats so low now? Enough, Quan Jingqing said. I believe that student Li was not the only one who saw what happened. Dean Xie, what do you think we should do? Dean Xie complained in her heart. In their hearts, Quan Jingyi was a delinquent. So when the dean saw the situation, she immediately felt that it was Quan Jingyi's fault. However, now that Li Jianyue had suddenly stepped forward, the situation had fallen into an awkward situation. It wasn't Quan Jingyi's fault? Then wasn't the slap that Mayor Quan gave him wrongly? Was it for nothing? That's true. But since it wasn't student Quan who did it, why didn't he explain? Yang Ziheo's mother asked. Quan Jingyi smiled. This kind of thing has happened many times since I was young. If I had to explain everything, wouldn't I be exhausted? Moreover, my credibility with you is almost in the negatives. Even if I explained, would you believe me? His words made all the parents speechless. Yes, would they believe him? Most people would only think that Quan Jingyi was just looking for an excuse to deceive them. So, he simply didn't say anything and didn't explain anything? When Quan Jingqing heard his son's words, he felt a little uncomfortable. He said, so you simply don't explain? It's a useless struggle. There's no point in doing it, Quan Jingyi said carelessly. No matter what happens now, you've already hit him. I should be able to leave. Dean Xie felt that it was better to resolve this matter behind closed doors. Now that Quan Jingyi left, the truth of the matter couldn't be clarified. However, just as she was about to speak, Quan Jingyi had already turned around. Dean Xie hurriedly called out to him, wait a moment, the matter isn't clear yet. As expected, Quan Jingyi stopped. However, he only turned back to look at her. Then he turned to look at Li Jianrui and reached out to grab her hand. Without a word, he walked towards the door. Li Jianrui was shocked. She subconsciously looked back at the parents behind her and smiled awkwardly as a greeting. Then she was dragged away by Quan Jingyi. After they walked out of the director's office, Li Jianrui hurriedly retracted her hand and said, "How can you be like this? You don't even explain yourself when others misunderstand you. Everyone says that you're a delinquent. If this is how you get your reputation as a delinquent, then you're being wronged." It was not fair at all. Just because of his bad reputation they could directly convict him? Li Jianrui felt very angry. However, the person who was standing in front of her didn't seem to care at all. This made her even angrier. Quan Jingyi smiled faintly and said, "I didn't expect you to be so righteous. You've turned into a heroine of justice. Are you going to support the weak? You can still laugh. I'm so angry. Just now, that male classmate even said those words to frame me, slandering me for liking you. How could such words be said so casually?" She hated Quan Jingyi. Although this hatred had dissipated a lot after the scene just now, she still hated him. She didn't hate him less just because she felt sorry for him. Li Jianrui had been the little princess of the family since she was young. She didn't know how to hide her emotions. At this moment, all her emotions were written on her face. She glared at Quan Jingyi and pouted and clenched her fists. He didn't need to listen to what she wanted to say next to be able to see what she was thinking at a glance. To be honest, she looked so stupid that it was cute. Quan Jingyi couldn't help but laugh softly. He reached out and patted her head. He said, "All right, I'm not that weak. I've been used to it since I was young. On the other hand, if I clarify everything, he'll be in trouble." Li Jianyue's eyes widened. "Well, actually, it's better for others to be in trouble than for you to be in trouble. It's just a slap." Quan Jingyi used his tongue to touch the inner wall of his cheek. "It's not that bad." "That's not bad." Li Jianyue subconsciously covered her face. "Well, if I get hit, I think I'll cry." Quan Jingyi's smile widened. He couldn't help but think, "Do I need you to think? I don't even need to think to know that you'll cry." Thinking of this, Quan Jingyi shook his head. He turned around and said, "Go back to class." What about you? Delinquents won't be in the mood for class if they get hit." As he spoke, he turned around and waved his hand at Li Jianyue. Then he slowly walked away with lazy steps. Li Jianyue felt that he was too much. He was so confident in skipping class. But she also wanted to skip class. However, this thought could only remain in her mind. Soon Li Jianyue returned to the classroom. After half a day of classes, Li Mosen went to class 11 to look for Li Jianyue as usual. Zhong Yikuan and Lu Yuanyang followed behind him. The female students in class 11 were all looking forward to this moment. When they saw Li Mosen, their eyes widened and they pushed and shoved each other. Their eyes were filled with hearts. Li Mosen was already used to this. He asked her, "What do you want to eat for lunch?" When Li Jianyue heard this, she replied casually, "Anything is fine." "Hey," Zhonghua looked at Li Jianyue and said, "Why is little sister so distracted today? What are you thinking about?" Li Jianyue looked up and said, "Nothing." Lu Yuanyang came over enthusiastically and said, "Little sister, stay and practice basketball with us after school. I'll let you see how valiant your brother Yang is." "Go away," Zhonghua pushed him. "You're valiant? Don't listen to him, little sister. In our school's basketball team, the best player is your brother. As for second place, it's definitely me. What does this guy have to do with it?" When Lu Yuanyang heard this, he was unhappy. You stupid Zhonghua. If you have the guts, come and play solo. I'll torture you to death." "Come on, I'm not afraid of you." Zhonghua puffed out his chest. The two boys bumped into each other and they seemed to be at loggerheads. However, they were quickly separated. Li Mosen pushed them apart and snorted, "Childish. Hey, how can you say that? Am I still your little cutie?" Zhonghua tugged at his sleeves and looked heartbroken. Li Jianyue couldn't help but laugh. She couldn't help but ask, "Is everyone on your school's basketball team so lively?" Chapter 22:10. When Li Jianyue heard this, she looked at traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and asked, "Is it very harsh?" "It's not that harsh. It's just that we are all the only children in our families. Sometimes Mosen's words are not pleasant to the ear, so..." At this point, Lu Yuanyang interrupted traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and said, "Stop right there. What do you mean by sometimes his words aren't pleasant to the ear? Mosen's mouth is beyond saving, alright? It's just that we have a stronger psychological endurance. If it were anyone else, who would be able to take it?" Lu Yuanyang said. When Lu Yuanyang said this, Li Mosen's eyes swept over. Lu Yuanyang immediately turned his head away and pretended that the weather was good as he whistled. Li Jianyue looked at Li Mosen and asked, "Is there no one else now?" "We're a little short for the time being," Li Mosen said calmly. Traditional Chinese medicine practitioner shook his head when he heard this. "How is it a little short for the time being? There will always be a time when we're not short of people." As Lu Yuanyang walked, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "That's right, little sister, I remember that you are in class 11. When I passed by last time I thought I saw your desk mate. He looks a little familiar. What's his name?" Li Jianyue replied, "Quan Jingyi. He's a delinquent." "He's a delinquent with a bit of a personality." Li Jianyue thought that the world might have some misunderstanding about him. Actually, he is quite a good person. When traditional Chinese medicine practitioner heard Quan Jingyi's name, his eyes lit up and he said, "So he's Quan Jingyi." Li Jianyue was a little surprised. She looked over and asked, "Why is Quan Jingyi so famous? Why do so many people know him?" "It's not strange that they know him. He is indeed quite famous. He was already quite tall when he was in junior high. He was also the leading basketball player in his previous school. Not only that, he was also the school hunk in his middle school. He's quite handsome and is very popular with girls." The leading basketball player in the team? Li Jianyue was more concerned about this. She suddenly had an idea and said, "If we can let Quan Jingyi join the basketball team, wouldn't that solve your urgent problem?" The school basketball team was currently lacking players. If someone like Quan Jingyi could join, he would definitely be a great help to the team. Moreover, the inter-school basketball competition was approaching. As the representative, Li Mosen could imagine how nervous he must be. Lu Yuanyang was fine. When traditional Chinese medicine practitioner heard Li Jianyue's words, he immediately came forward and asked, "How is your relationship with your desk mate?" It doesn't seem too good." It was a little. Li Jianyue was a little ashamed. Li Jianyue was Li Jianyue. Jianyue was a little. Li Jianyue was goddess Li Jianyue. Li Jianyue felt a little awkward when she was asked this question. She added, "But since he was on the school basketball team in junior high, he must be interested in basketball. If we invite him to join, he should be willing to join." "It's hard to say," Lu Yuanyang said with an unfathomable expression on his face. "From what I know, Quan Jingyi did something to offend his stepmother during the summer break when he was in junior high school. Now he doesn't even have an allowance every month. Other than providing him with food and a place to stay, his family doesn't give him a single cent. That's why he occasionally sneaks out to work." Li Liyang heard. Chapter 22:11. Zhonghua nudged Lu Yuanyang and said, "Forget it. Why do you care about this? The most important thing now is to think of a way to get him into the basketball team." "What do you know?" Lu Yuanyang looked disgusted. "If you want to get Quan Jingyi into the basketball team, you have to solve the problem of his pocket money first. If you don't have money to spend, you won't even have money to go to the internet cafe. How are you going to survive then?" Zhonghua secretly clicked his tongue when he heard that. That's true. But this father is too cruel. He actually started to abuse his son for the sake of his concubine. TSK. Li Jianrui heard that and had a plan in her mind. Li Mosen brought them to the top floor of the campus cafeteria. It was the most expensive and least frequented Chinese and Western restaurant. Li Jianrui was a little distracted during the meal. Li Mosen saw it and asked her, "I saw you looking for Dean Xie this morning. There were a few other students in there. What did you do?" Li Jianrui didn't expect to be seen by him. Her little face looked conflicted for a moment and then she said, "Something happened, so I went to help." Who knew that he didn't want her help at all? Speaking of which, Li Jianrui also felt that she was a little nosy. Li Mosen didn't ask any more questions. He nodded and continued eating. Zhonghua and Lu Yuanyang had known Li Mosen for more than 2 years. At this time they felt that something was wrong with Li Mosen. He didn't seem too happy. Although this feeling was very faint, it really made them feel this kind of emotion. The two of them looked at each other and saw a look of certainty in each other's eyes. Li Jianrui didn't notice at all. After eating, she found a place to rest for a while. The first class in the afternoon was the class teacher's class. When the bell rang, Quan Jingyi walked in lazily from outside and sat in his seat. When he sat down, he put a small thing in Li Jianrui's cabinet. It was a pink thing. Li Jianrui looked down and saw that it was a box of strawberry-flavored milk. Li Jianrui was a little surprised and looked up at him. Quan Jingyi didn't look at her and said casually, "It's leftover from lunch. I don't like strawberry-flavored milk. You can solve it." Li Jianrui blinked and picked up the strawberry-flavored milk. It was a brand she liked very much, but the packaging was very new so she didn't recognize it immediately. But on the packaging there were 2 blue words in the shape of a chicken's feet. Thank you. Obviously it was written by someone. Such ugly words must be from Quan Jingyi. Was it because of what happened in the morning? Was it Quan Jiao? Before Li Jianyue could figure it out, Quan Jingyi's voice sounded again. If you don't like it, then throw it away. Li Jianyue was now sure that this guy definitely didn't want to thank her in person, so he wrote it in a roundabout way. With a look of disdain in her eyes, Li Jianyue put the milk back and said, "It's shameful to waste it. I'll drink it after class." Li, Quan not care. Quan Shin Quan. You don. Lu. Is. Jing. Quan of Jing. Shan Ming not. Shan. With. Li to Li. Chapter 22:12. Li Jianyue didn't expose him. Soon the homeroom teacher arrived. "Hello, teacher." They shouted in unison. Although Quan Jingyi's voice wasn't loud, it was still loud. Li Jianyue heard it and thought to herself, this guy doesn't seem too bad. Everyone must have some misunderstanding about him. In fact, the good student who argued with Quan Jingyi in the morning was not as good as Quan Jingyi. At least, Quan Jingyi wouldn't say something unrealistic because he wanted to shirk responsibility. After the homeroom teacher asked the students to sit down, she looked around and finally her gaze fell on Quan Jingyi. Many students in the class also noticed this and followed the teacher's gaze. Quan Jingyi raised his head slightly and raised his eyebrows slightly, looking at her with some doubt. The homeroom teacher said, "Quan Jingyi, sit at the back. Sun Xiaoyu, sit up." Quan Jingyi and Sun Xiaoyu, who were called, looked at each other. Unlike Quan Jingyi's calmness, Sun Xiaoyu looked a little confused. Quan Jingyi asked, "Why?" Li Jianyue's parents said that you have affected Li Jianyue's normal learning state. They hope that you can change seats. The homeroom teacher's tone was indisputable. Then she looked at Sun Xiaoyu in the back row of the third group. Sun Xiaoyu was a male student who looked quite innocent and silly. His eyes were very small and he was a little fat. The school uniform he wore was very clean and he looked quite cute. However, Sun Xiaoyu didn't want to change seats. Sitting at the back was not only more free but also more secretive, okay? No matter what he did, he wouldn't be discovered immediately. Especially his position, it was a good place. Sun Xiaoyu felt a little wronged and said, "Teacher, I don't want to sit at the front. It's more suitable for me to sit at the back." The teacher said, "Change seats. Your parents also said that it's easy for you to be distracted sitting at the back. Now that you are in high school, you still have to pay attention to your studies. If you don't change seats, I can only tell your parents." Li Jianyue looked at them. To be honest, she didn't want to change seats either, but what did her parents say? She didn't think that Quan Jingyi had affected her. Moreover, she didn't say anything about school to her family. How did her parents know? Quan Jingyi had already packed his things and was carrying his school bag. Then he stood up and threw his school bag on Sun Xiaoyu's table. He tilted his head and said, "Go up." Sun Xiaoyu wanted to cry but no tears came out. He wanted to struggle one last time and said, "Teacher, there's no room for discussion." The teacher was impartial. If you really want to change your seat, it's very simple. For the first mock exam, as long as you get into the top 50 of your grade, you can choose your own seat to sit with. Then, the homeroom teacher looked at everyone and said, "The same goes for the rest of you. However, before you have the ability to get into the top 50, you better behave yourself." Sun Xiaoyu was on the verge of tears as he howled, "How is that possible? There are more than 500 people in the entire grade and there are 15 classes. If I could get into the top 50, would I still be sitting in class 11? It's good that you know. Hurry up and change classes." Li Jianyue felt a little uncomfortable. Sun Xiaoyu didn't want to change and she didn't want to change either. But who knew that Quan Jingyi didn't have any reluctance to leave? Chapter 22:13. Li Jianyue's temper was considered good, but she still felt very unhappy when facing Sun Xiaoyu like this. She had been used to being pampered by her family since she was young. She had never encountered such unhappiness before. She called out unhappily, "Sun Xiaoyu?" Sun Xiaoyu was about to fall asleep, but when he was called out, he immediately came back to his senses and asked, What's wrong?" Li Jianyue's little face tensed up and she said seriously, "I don't care if you sleep in class, but can you sit up straight? At least don't squeeze over to my side. My seat is very small. There's no way to study at all." Sun Xiaoyu's chubby face turned slightly red and he said, Oh. Then his chubby body moved to the side. Li Jianyue's expression finally looked better and she sat up straight. Soon the bell rang. It was a math class. The math teacher was a very short-sighted old man. Sun Xiaoyu put his book upright and hid his head behind it. Then he began to doze off. He had just adjusted his sitting posture during the break, but not long after the class started, he moved back crookedly. His head was even drooping. Li Jianyue couldn't stand it anymore. She reached out and pushed him. Sit properly. Sun Xiaoyu was still in a daze. When he heard that, he sat up straight. But after a while he was beaten back to his original state. Li Jianyue was furious and said, "Can you sit properly? I don't even have a seat." The class was unusually quiet. Li Jianyue's voice suddenly rose in the classroom. When she said that, the surrounding students all looked over. Li Jianyue's face burned, but she felt angry when she looked at Sun Xiaoyu. Sun Xiaoyu also noticed that many people around him were looking over. He also blushed and said with some grievance, "Why are you so overbearing? I didn't take up much space. Although I'm fat, it's quite hurtful for you to say that." Li Jianyue was even angrier. She said, "Can't you just sit up straight? What does it have to do with your weight? If you don't sit properly and make your desk mate uncomfortable, I won't be able to go to class." Ahem. The math teacher slammed the podium. "Sun Xiaoyu, sit up straight. Don't disturb the other students. If there's anything else we can talk after class. Let's go back to class now." Sun Xiaoyu sat down and muttered in a low voice, "I don't see you like this when Quan Jingyi is sitting here. He sleeps in class and I sleep in class. You just like him and not me, right?" His voice wasn't loud, so only Li Jianyue heard it. Li Jianyue was furious. "Look at how you're sitting. At least Quan Jingyi is sitting up straight. He won't disturb me. He sleeps in his own seat. He's nothing like you." Sun Xiaoyu was unconvinced. How is that possible? Who can sit up straight when they sleep? Look back and see how Quan Jingyi is sleeping. When Li Jianyue heard this, she subconsciously turned her head to look. At the table in the last row, Quan Jingyi sat crookedly. He leaned on the table and moved from one table to another in one breath. His movements were extremely arrogant and wanton. Li Jianyue was stunned and explained, "That's because he's sitting alone. When I'm there, I also sit alone. I'm used to it now. I don't want to change seats." "If you can't stand it, go and ask the teacher to change seats," Sun Xiaoyu muttered. "It's your parents who asked you to change seats. Go and ask your parents to change seats." Chapter 22:14. Sun Xiaoyu's tone was not very good. Li Jianyue was so angry that she didn't want to talk to him. She turned around and continued to listen to the class. Li Jianyue knew very well that she was not the kind of girl who was particularly smart. If she wanted to go to the same university as Brother Mosen, she had to study hard so that she could continue to go to the same school as Brother Mosen. However, if someone disturbed her, she would be easily distracted, so she couldn't sit with such a desk mate. Even though Quan Jingyi slept in class and occasionally skipped classes, he was still a very quiet person. Occasionally he would listen to the class as well. Compared to him, Sun Xiaoyu was really terrible. Li Jianyue held back her anger. After class, she stood up and planned to talk to the head teacher about changing seats. After standing up, she squinted and saw Quan Jingyi with sleepy eyes. He was sitting up lazily, stretching and yawning. He looked a little hot. There was sweat on his forehead and his bangs were wet. His slightly long black hair was stuck to his forehead, and there were traces of his sleeves on it. As if sensing Li Jianyue's gaze, Quan Jingyi looked at her sideways and raised his eyebrows slightly as if asking, "What's the matter?" Li Jianyue suddenly felt a little depressed. They had been desk mates for at least several weeks. Why didn't he have any reaction after changing seats? Bad guy. Li Jianyue turned around and went to find the head teacher. The head teacher nodded to show that she understood, but asked her to bear with it for a while and wait for her class to change seats. However, there was no class today, so Li Jianyue could only bear with it for 2 more classes. On the way home, sitting in the back seat of Li Mosen's car, her unhappy look did not change at all. Li Mosen had long noticed that she seemed to be unhappy. He rode the bicycle and his slightly curly black hair flew in the wind. His white skin seemed to glow under the setting sun. He asked, "Do you want to go eat ice cream?" Li Jianyue's eyes lit up. "Can I?" The ice cream here was, of course, not simple ice cream. Li Jianyue and Li Mosen had a little secret that belonged only to the two of them since junior high school. Li Mosen knew a very good place. There was everything there which was equivalent to a small amusement park. However, the location was a little remote. It was not far from the school, but it was far from their home. As soon as Li Jianyue finished speaking, she realized that Mosen was heading in the direction of the mini amusement park. Li Jianyue's mood improved instantly. She pinched Li Mosen's school jacket and asked, What if Mom asks about it later? Mom and Dad are not at home today. I just told Daesu and he already knows. Lee Mosun's voice was bright and clear. He seemed to be smiling, but it was a little vague against the wind. Lee Jianyue couldn't help but smile. She was in a great mood. When they arrived, Lee Mosun locked the bicycle and led Lee Jianyue inside. Lee Jianyue jumped up and down. She stuck her head out to look around and asked in surprise, "Why haven't I seen that before? Is it newly built?" Lee Jianyue pointed at a tall Ferris wheel. "It's so beautiful. If it was a little later and the lights were all turned on, would it be even more beautiful?" "Yes." Lee Mosun held her hand. "Then let's play something else first. We can stay a little longer today. We'll come to see it together later." Lee Jianyue nodded excitedly and hugged Lee Mosun's arm. A satisfied smile finally appeared on her face. She pointed to the pink ice cream stall not far away and said, "I want that. I want 2 balls, 1 chocolate and 1 strawberry." Lee Mosun's blue eyes looked down at her bright smile. The slight tension disappeared without a trace. He reached out and rubbed her head dotingly. He said in a light tone, "Okay." Hearing this word, Lee Jianyue proudly straightened her back. Chapter 22:15. Lee Jianyue hadn't been here for a long time. It was a little crazy to play here. After getting the ice cream, Lee Jianyue licked it contentedly. From time to time, she turned her head to look at the pedestrians around her. When she saw a young couple kissing on the side of the road, she quietly lowered her eyes and leaned over to Lee Mosun. Brother Mosun looked to the left. Someone is kissing. Lee Mosun turned his head to look. The young boy and girl were obviously not familiar with such things. The girl pushed the boy away and ran away with a blush on her face. The boy quickly chased after her and shouted, "Wait, don't be angry." "This man," Lee Jianyue smiled and said to Lee Mosun, "that girl definitely won't be angry." Lee Mosun looked at the young couple running away sweetly. He turned his head to look at Lee Jianyue. There was an indescribable meaning in his eyes as he asked, "Why?" Her pink tongue licked the strawberry ice cream that was much lighter in color than her tongue. She smiled and said, "That's because that little sister likes that guy. Otherwise she wouldn't have come out to play with him. She even kissed him. If she didn't like him, she would have slapped him and run away crying." Lee Jianyue didn't notice anything wrong with Lee Mosun's behavior at all. She licked the strawberry ice cream with her pink tongue. As she spoke, even Lee Jianyue felt that what she said made sense. She looked a little proud. Lee Mosun looked at her deeply and said, "We also came to play together." Lee Jianyue licked the ice cream and said indifferently, "That's different. They are a couple. We are brother and sister." When Lee Mosun heard the last 2 words, his heart couldn't help but pause. He couldn't help but repeat in a low voice, "Brother and sister?" Lee Jianyue didn't hear him. She looked around and ate the last bite of ice cream. She pulled Lee Mosun's hand and shouted, "I want to play on the pirate ship." Then she rolled her eyes and said, "Do you want to play with me?" In the past, when Lee Mosun brought her here, he never played. Lee Jianyue always laughed at him, saying that he was timid and didn't dare to play such a small game. But every time, Lee Jianyue's taunts were useless. Lee Mosun was determined not to come up. Lee Jianyue had thought that Lee Mosun would definitely not play with them this time. She was already prepared to go on an adventure alone. Unexpectedly, Lee Mosun looked at the couple who were still shouting loudly on the pirate ship and holding each other's hands. He actually said, "Okay." Lee Jianyue's eyes lit up and she cheered. Afraid that he would go back on his word, she quickly pulled him and started running. Lee Mosun was quickly dragged away by her. After getting on board, Lee Jianyue screamed all the way. She sat on the pirate ship and held Lee Mosun's hand tightly. Lee Mosun held her tightly and asked, "Are you afraid?" Lee Jianyue immediately shouted, "I'm scared." Ah! Lee Mosun was speechless. There was really no one else who could shout so excitedly even if they were afraid. After Lee Jianyue came down, she laughed all the way. She spun around happily and shouted, "Brother Mosun, were you so scared that you didn't dare to scream just now?" Lee Mosun smiled and said, "Yes, it was too scary." Lee Jianyue looked unconvinced. "Can you be more careful when you're afraid? Then should I shiver first?" Chapter 22:16. Lee Mosun raised his head to take a look. The pendulum was currently in motion, and the screams coming from it were much louder than those from the pirate ship. There were also a lot more people on the pendulum. Everyone seemed to be laughing, but some of them were scared to the point that their faces were ashen. Lee Mosun looked and asked, "Is it very scary?" Lee Jianyue was a little proud and said, "The king of the amusement park, the super big pendulum. Some people would think that this is even scarier than a roller coaster." Li Mosen had been on a roller coaster before. Li Mosen had seen this big pendulum many times, but he had never been interested in it. Firstly, because he was not interested. Secondly, Li Mosen felt that it would be very noisy listening to the screams around him. When Li Jianyue saw that he didn't react, she deliberately tried to scare him. She said, "You might not know what it feels like. It's when you sit on the chair and the pendulum swings out. You'll feel like you're being thrown up into the air. That feeling of losing your center of gravity." Li Mosen raised his eyebrows slightly. "Is it that scary?" Li Jianyue looked at his leisurely expression and was even more unconvinced. She grabbed his hand and said, "Let's go. I'll bring you up and you will know." Li Mosen chuckled and responded faintly. Sure enough, when they came up they did not disappoint him. It really felt like his whole body was being thrown up. It was as if his whole body was weightless. He flew in the air and was on the verge of falling. The two of them were sitting together. Li Jianyue held his hand tightly and said, "I'm afraid that you are afraid. I want to give you a little sense of security." But after they went up, Li Jianyue did not even dare to open her eyes. She screamed at the top of her voice. Unlike the excited screams on the pirate ship just now, this time there was a clear sense of fear and panic. Li Mosen held her hand tightly and looked out slightly. The big pendulum was thrown very high and they were in the suburbs. At a glance they could see a lot of empty space. A little further, it was the famous sacred land of thousands of lavender. At a glance it was very beautiful. Li Mosen said, "Ursu, open your eyes and look." Li Jianyue did not dare to. She was just about to admit defeat when she suddenly realized that Li Mosen was so calm. Was he really not afraid at all? Li Jianyue tugged at his hand. She only dared to open her eyes when she felt that the pendulum was slowing down. Li Mosen saw her open her eyes. He pointed to the front and said, "We're almost there. Look ahead." Sure enough, as soon as Mosen's voice fell, the pendulum was facing the holy land of lavender. A large field of purple flowers, the dreamy colors were formed into a large heart shape. In the past, when Li Jianyue came to play, she never dared to open her eyes. This was the first time she saw it. Looking at the lavender, he couldn't help but exclaim, "How beautiful!" Li Mosen smirked. "Let's go to the Ferris wheel." Li Jianyue's eyes lit up and she immediately nodded her head. After the two of them came down, Li Jianyue walked past a clumsy kumaman. The kumaman was holding a basket in its hand. There were cute little things in the basket. There were all kinds of cat ears and rabbit ears. When the button was pressed, the little things would light up. Chapter 22:17. It was already past 6 o'clock, and the sky had already darkened. The night was hazy and the surrounding street lights were golden, mottled with the sound of human voices. Li Jianyue wore the rabbit ears on her head. The white light was wrapped in pink. Under the cute pink light, her originally cute face looked even more delicate. Li Jianyue did not forget to blink her big round eyes at Li Mosen. When she smiled, she even revealed a small canine tooth. Mosen was slightly dazed and his eyes darkened. He reached out and pressed her head. "You're cute. You've always been cute." Hehehe. Li Jianyue's face was full of joy. She turned around to pick up another ear from the kumaman bear basket. Squat down. It was a pair of wolf ears, dark blue with pink hues. It looked extremely cute. Li Mosen did as he was told and bent down slightly. Li Jianyue took the opportunity to stand on her tiptoes and put it on Li Mosen. "Wow, it's so cute." Li Mosen looked at her cute smile and poked her chubby face. "It's enough that you're cute. I don't want to be cute." As he spoke, he tried to take it off. Li Jianyue immediately pressed his hand down and said, "No, no, don't take it off. It's so pretty. By the way, how much is it?" Li Jianyue quickly took out her pink cartoon purse from her school bag, for fear that Li Mosen would go back on his words. Kumamoto carried a basket and began to draw with his other hand. Li Jianyue took a look. "A 1 is 22 or 40, right?" Kumamoto gave her a thumbs up. She looked at the kumaman bear and then at Li Mosen. She said, "You must be a handsome man. You're so tall. You're even taller than my brother." Li Mosen wore the wolf ears reluctantly. When he saw that she was still talking to the kumaman bear, he patted her head and said, "Let's go. Do you still want to go home?" "Are we going home after the Ferris wheel?" Li Jianyue looked a little reluctant. She rubbed her stomach and said, "I'm hungry." "Then let's go back and eat." "I want sushi." Mosen smiled. He couldn't hide the affection in his eyes. "Okay." Li Jianyue immediately skipped away with a smile on her face. Her steps were light and quick, revealing the spirit of a young girl. The corners of Li Mosen's mouth curled up slightly. The helplessness and indulgence in his eyes couldn't be clearer. Mosen followed. He had only taken a few steps when he inexplicably felt as if someone was watching him from behind. When he turned around, he saw that the Kumaman bear had turned around and was handing a cat ear to a little girl. "Brother Mosen, hurry up," Li Jianyue urged from behind. Li Mosen looked at the Kumaman bear, which was more than 1.8 meters tall. He raised his eyebrows slightly and quickly turned around to follow Li Jianyue. The Ferris wheel was new and well maintained. The glass was wiped clean. As soon as Li Jianyue went up, she was attracted by the young girl's attire. The entire Ferris wheel was decorated with pink decorations, and there were also glazed tassels hanging from the top. The distance was a little high, but Li Mosen's height was within reach. "Wow, so beautiful." Li Jianyue's eyes looked left and right. Soon the Ferris wheel slowly rose. In the evening in Kingstown, the lights were just beginning to come on. The night was hazy and there were people surging below. Li Jianyue held the handle with both hands and looked down. Her bright eyes were sparkling. There was nothing else in Li Mosen's eyes. His eyes clearly reflected Li Jianyue's appearance. Clean and clear. Chapter 22:18. The Ferris wheel rose slowly. It was not too far away from the horizon. Li Mosen looked at Li Jianyue with sparkling eyes. At that moment he felt that someone was looking at him. Subconsciously turning his head, he easily spotted the clumsy Kumaman amidst the bustling crowd. The Kumaman did not seem to be looking at him. He was holding something in his hand and soliciting customers. "Wow, it's so beautiful," Li Jianyue exclaimed. "Brother Mosen, look. You can really see it." The Ferris wheel rose higher and higher. Li Jianyue looked at the lavender garden in the distance excitedly. "It's really beautiful. There are so many lights. Ah, look." Li Mosen naturally walked down beside her. Li Jianyue sat by the side and looked out. Her face was full of amazement. "Look, it looks like Little Red Riding Hood." Li Jianyue pointed at the theme lights in the park. The lights were connected to form a line. It was the image of Little Red Riding Hood. Next to Little Red Riding Hood stood a wolf grandmother. Li Jianyue looked over and realized that the park was actually very big. Moreover, the view from the Ferris wheel was very good. The glass was very clean, and the scenery in all directions naturally came into view. "Wow." Li Jianyue picked up her phone to take a picture. Suddenly she thought of something and asked Li Mosen, "We're not back yet. Are you sure you told brother?" Li Jianyue had called him that since she was young. Li Jianxian was the older brother, Li Mosen was brother Mosen, and Yu Chulin was brother Chu. Other than the biological brother, the others all had names. When Li Mosen was young, he was quite bothered by this title. He felt that Ursu was reminding him that he was not their biological son. But later he felt very lucky. Fortunately, she did not treat him as her biological brother. When he heard this question, Li Mosen nodded slightly and said, "I did." Li Jianyue was relieved. After snapping many pictures of the scenery, she suddenly turned her head and smirked mischievously. "The wolf ears are so cute. I want to show them to brother," Li Jianyue said. Li Mosen immediately grabbed her hand. "You can't send them. That's a pity. Of course, such beautiful pictures should be shared with everyone." Li Jianyue giggled. After she clicked on it, she realized that Li Mosen really had no blind spots at all. He looked good from every angle. The most important thing was, it looked like the legendary little wolf dog. Li Jianyue blurted out in a moment of carelessness. Then she covered her mouth and hurried to find Li Jianxian's WeChat to send out. Li Mosen took her phone away. "You can't send it or I'll delete it." "I know." "Then don't post it," Li Mosen said with a warning look on his face. However, when he saw the pitiful look on Li Jianyue's face, he took a step back and said, "You can use it as wallpaper." When Li Jianyue heard this, her eyes lit up. Okay. I'll use it as my wallpaper." She took the phone back and changed the wallpaper for herself. Li Mosen's dark blue eyes were staring at her on the phone screen. The corners of his mouth were slightly curved, and with his slightly curly short hair, he looked like a prince in a fairy tale. Li Mosen's eyes were fixed on her. It was just that the prince did not know how to wear a school uniform. Li Jianyue giggled and took a screenshot. She posted it on her WeChat Moments and wrote, "I've changed to a new wallpaper." When Li Mosen saw her mischievous smile, he knew that something was wrong. He reached out to take her phone, but Li Jianyue had already expected it. She held the phone tightly and said, "I didn't send it to brother. She just posted it on her WeChat Moments." Li Mosen was skeptical. He turned his head and looked out. The Ferris wheel had already reached the ground. The two of them got off the Ferris wheel. Li Mosen subconsciously looked for Kumaman. Chapter 22:19. As soon as Li Mosen's photo of the little wolf puppy was posted, his WeChat moments exploded. Rong Pan Pan? How did Brother Mosen become more handsome? Oh Xiao Xiao. 66,666 My mom told him to be careful when he goes out. Daesu. Brother Chu liked the post. As for the rest, they were all students from the same class. Chuyun, wow, who is this? Was he a newly debuted male idol? Fang Jinjin. Hee, this is Senior Mosen in grade 12. I really envy you for having such a handsome brother. Below, envy +1, envy +2, envy +3. Li Jinrui looked at the comments and felt happy. She turned her head and found that Li Mosen was a little absent-minded. Brother Mosen, what's wrong? Li Mosen quickly turned his gaze and shook his head. Let's go eat. Okay. Li Jinrui liked to eat out. At home, her parents specially found a nutritionist to customize the healthy diet. Although the taste was quite good, anyone would get tired of eating it over the years. Li Mosen took Li Jinrui to the restaurant that he often ate with his friends. It was a restaurant that specialized in pickled fish with chili and chili. In addition to the pickled fish with chili and chili, there was barbecue and dessert. Sure enough, when Li Jinrui came over, it was as if she had discovered a new world. She ordered a lot of things. Li Mosen saw that she ordered a lot of things and said helplessly, "You ordered so much. What if you can't finish it?" "It's okay." Li Jinrui said confidently and smiled. "You are here. Anyway, if I can't finish it, you can take care of it." Li Mosen said. "I can't finish it either." "Then why don't we ask our brothers to come and eat?" Li Jinrui picked up her phone and opened WeChat. Brothers definitely can't eat this in the capital. Grandpa and Grandma will definitely monitor their diet. TSK so poor. Forget it, Li Mosen interrupted her. We are eating secretly. It's better not to let Daesu and the others find out. And it was rare to have a chance to be alone. Why did they have to ask others to come along? If Daesu came alone it would be fine. But if Daesu came, Chu would definitely come along. Li Mosen picked up his cup to hide the emotions on his face. Li Jianhua thought for a moment. That's true. Maybe brother and brother Chu are still on mom and dad's side. If mom and dad find out, I'll be scolded again. Li Jianhua understood and placed the phone on the table. Hey, isn't this Senior Li? A woman's voice with a hint of pleasant surprise said, I can't believe I'm able to meet you here. It must be fate. Li Jianhua followed the sound and looked over. It was a girl who looked more mature than her. She was about 17 or 18 years old, but she was wearing casual clothes. Her face had makeup on and her hair was down. She looked at Li Mosen with a blush on her cheeks. Li Mosen raised his eyelids lazily, glanced at him casually, and then ignored him. The girl didn't expect Li Mosen to be so cold. The shy smile on her face froze. Order a drink? Li Mosen glanced at the menu. You ordered so much. Don't you know how to order a drink? His tone was clearly dissatisfied, but there was no hint of blame in it. Li Jianhua had long been accustomed to such a tone, but in the ears of outsiders, it sounded full of doting. Chapter 22:20. As soon as she said this, Li Jianhua turned to look at her. Just as she was about to speak angrily, Li Mosen spoke up. Do I know you? Li Mosen's tone was light, with obvious alienation and indifference. It was obvious that he was unwilling to talk to her. The girl's already blushing face became even hotter at this moment. Her eyes immediately turned red. I'm from year 3. I'm in year 3. Li Mosen looked away and his gaze fell on the menu. I don't know you. He then asked Li Jianhua, how about orange juice? I want to drink soy milk. Li Mosen smiled and replied, okay. He quickly called the waiter over and directly passed the menu in his hand to the girl in front of him. From the beginning to the end, he did not even look at her. The girl finally couldn't take it anymore. Wah! She burst into tears and turned to run. When Li Jianhua saw this, she felt a little guilty and said, Brother Mosen, it's not good for you to do this. Why not? Li Mosen did not feel that there was anything wrong with him. Since you don't like them, you should not give them any hope at all. Let them know that I am an arrogant and impolite person, then they will not pester me. Li Jianhua frowned and said angrily, Brother Mosen is not like that. You are the best Brother Mosen. Li Mosen smiled slightly. How good am I? Very good, very good. Li Jianhua quickly counted on her fingers. You are polite, handsome, and obedient to mommy and daddy. Also, grandpa and grandma like you very much. So do grandpa and great-grandpa. Everyone says that you are a good child. And Brother Mosen is very good. He is super good to me. Li Jianyue said. Li Mosen couldn't help but laugh when he saw the little girl listing her good points in a daze. Alright, I'm tired of hearing this, he said with a chuckle. Yes, Li Jianyue was a little proud. I am not the only one saying it. There are other people saying it too. That is why Brother Mosen is tired of hearing it. The waiters served their drinks, and Li Jianyue drank a mouthful of soy milk contentedly. The corners of Li Mosen's lips curled up and his tone was light. Yes. That's why you're not a bad person. You're right. If you can't give them a response, just kill their ideas in the cradle. That's right. Brother Mosen, I support you. That's not what you said just now. It's all in the past. Don't mind it. Clever little brat. Li Jianyue laughed shamelessly. Suddenly, she noticed that someone was looking at her from afar. He subconsciously turned his head to look. Just 2 or 3 tables away, a girl was glaring at him angrily. Wasn't that the girl who had just run away? Li Jianyue suddenly felt a little guilty. She shifted her gaze and saw the girl sitting in front of her. That girl was wearing a beautiful pink princess hat and exuded a sweet Lolita style. She looked very clean, but why did she look so familiar? As if sensing Li Jianyue's gaze, he turned his head and grinned at her. When he smiled, Li Jianyue felt as if something had hit her heart. Such a sweet smile was too lethal. So beautiful, so cute. Chapter 22-21. Li Jianyue couldn't help but take a few more glances and returned a friendly smile. Li Mosen noticed it and followed Li Jianyue's gaze. He had always had a photographic memory. Of course, he knew that he had seen this girl before. However, he didn't have any impression of this person. Li Mosen only looked back and retracted his gaze. Eat. Li Jianyue picked up her chopsticks and picked up some food for Li Mosen. She smiled and said, "This is to reward the good Li Mosen." Li Mosen couldn't help but chuckle and picked up some food for her. "This is to reward the little fairy Li Ursu. Hey, I have a name, okay? My name is Li Jianyue." Li Mosen lowered his head to eat. "Go back early after eating, Li Ursu." Li Jianyue was angry and reached out her chopsticks to his bowl. "Return it to me. I won't give you a reward." Li Mosen quickly stopped her chopsticks. "Hey, don't touch me. Then apologize to me. I was wrong." Li Mosen held back his laughter. "Little fairy, Li Jianyue, eat." Li Jianyue lowered her head and put a piece of ginger in Li Mosen's bowl. "This is your punishment. Where's the reward?" "It's in your bowl." "Ah, you're fair." "Of course. I'm a fair fairy." Li Mosen couldn't help but smile. He picked up some of her favorite fish into her bowl. Li Jianyue's face was full of pride. While stuffing food into her mouth, she said, "Even if you please me like this, I won't cancel your punishment." Yes. From afar, Li Mosen's blue eyes looked especially bright under the soft warm light. His slightly curly black hair made his sharp and deep face look especially gentle. However, such gentleness and consideration were for another girl. Although that girl was also very beautiful, she was not bad looking. Why was Senior Mosen so gentle to her? Tan Wanner looked at them from afar and felt very uncomfortable. She said angrily, "Senior Mosen is too ungentlemanly. He's deliberately so cold to other girls in front of his girlfriend. He must be pretending. Senior Mosen's true colors must be a polite and gentlemanly senior, just like a prince." When Qin Shizao heard this, she laughed. "What does it have to do with you? Isn't it okay for him to treat his girlfriend well? It's only right for him to behave well in front of his girlfriend. If you were his girlfriend, you would be happy to see such a boyfriend." Qin Wanner was speechless, but she still felt unconvinced. She whispered, "But you shouldn't be so cold. It hurts. If I don't hurt him, will you give up?" Tan Wanner was completely speechless this time. She said angrily, "Take a bath? Whose cousin are you? Why are you like this?" "Stop, my name is Shizao, not take a bath. Besides, I'm only 1 day younger than you. Whether in terms of appearance or mentality, I'm much more mature than you." Qin Shizao drank her tea. Under the brim of her wide princess hat, she looked at Li Mosen with a smile. "I won't foolishly go up and strike up a conversation." "Then what do you want?" Tan Wanner looked at Qin Shizao and was a little curious. "Do you also like boys like Senior Mosen? But he's so fierce." Chapter 22-22. It had been a month since the start of the new semester. After the Golden Week, everyone's mind was still on vacation. Li Xiqing took his 2 sons and a daughter to New Zealand again. Everyone had a good time. However, the happiness of the past few days made it impossible for Li Jianrui to return to her study state immediately after returning to school. When she returned to school, she found that other than herself, the other students were the same. She felt relieved. Ever since they were assigned seats, Li Jianrui had been feeling very uncomfortable. Everyone used to say that Quan Jingyi was a bad child, a typical delinquent, because he often acted like a gangster in junior high school and organized school violence among his classmates. Therefore, everyone was very afraid of him. However, after interacting with him, Li Jianrui realized that it was not like that at all. Although Quan Jingyi did not like to talk to others, he had never bullied other students in the class, nor did he fight as they said. Even when he slept in class, he always stayed in his own seat and would not disturb his desk mate at all. Just this point alone made him much better than her new desk mate, Sun Xiaoyu. Sun Xiaoyu was originally fat, but after this holiday he became much rounder. What was worse was that he seemed to be very tired from playing. As soon as he entered the class, he collapsed in his seat and fell asleep. It was not until the morning reading class began and the teacher came over that he slowly woke up. But when the teacher wasn't paying attention and the students were still reading, Sun Xiaoyu dozed off again. He blended in with the sound of reading, making it impossible to notice his appearance. Sun Xiaoyu fell asleep and his body tilted toward Li Jianrui. Li Jianrui was so angry that she poked him with a pen. Sun Xiaoyu immediately bounced up in pain and shouted, "Are you crazy?" It was very loud. This shout made the sound of reading in the class stop abruptly. Everyone looked over. Li Jianrui was shocked by such a shout. Seeing that everyone in the class was looking at her, she said angrily, "You are affecting my study. If you want to sleep, go home and sleep." Sun Xiaoyu was already very annoyed when his sleep was interrupted. Now that he was scolded by Li Jianrui in front of so many people, he became even angrier. "Why are you pretending to be a good student? Don't think that I don't know that you are also absent-minded in class. Do you still think that you are a good student? I think you have a problem with me. You don't want to sit with me. You want to sit with Quan Jingyi, right? It's better to sit with Quan Jingyi than with you. You sleep in class and disturb others. I'm not going to sit with you anymore. You think I want to sit with you?" The surrounding students began to discuss. Li Jianrui slammed her pen on the table and turned her head. By chance she saw Quan Jingyi looking at her. Li Jianrui became even angrier. The more she looked at Sun Xiaoyu, the more she disliked him. The teacher quickly rushed over and asked loudly, "What's going on?" Li Jianrui felt a little wronged and told him about the matter. Sun Xiaoyu's voice grew even louder. "Teacher, don't listen to her nonsense. This Li Jianrui doesn't have her mind on her studies at all. She just wants to sit with Quan Jingyi and have a puppy love." Li Jianrui was so angry that she was about to cry. She shouted, "You're talking nonsense. I didn't." Chapter 22-23. Sun Xiaoyu spoke with great detail. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the class cheered in unison and immediately started a commotion. So Yang Zihao really fought with Quan Jingyi because of Li Jianrui? That little four-eyed actually dared to fly into a rage for a beauty? I'm dying of laughter. I don't think Quan Jingyi likes Li Jianrui very much. He probably fought because he was unhappy with Yang Zihao. Quan Jingyi doesn't seem like someone who would like Li Jianrui. That's hard to say. I think Li Jianrui is quite pretty. If Quan Jingyi really likes Li Jianrui, there will be a good show to watch. Sun Xiaoyu, that fat pig, dares to offend Mrs. Quan? It was the first year of high school and they had just returned from the holidays. Everyone's hearts were floating, especially at this ignorant age. They were the most sensitive and curious about the gossip of unrequited love in puberty. At this moment, the class was in chaos. The teacher was furious when she saw this. She slammed the podium hard and shouted, "Quiet! Li Jianrui, Sun Xiaoyu, follow me to the office." Li Jianrui was so angry that she cried. She shouted, "It's not like that at all. Sun Xiaoyu is talking nonsense." The class was even more rowdy. "Sun Xiaoyu, you're dead. How dare you make Mrs. Quan cry? You're finished? Finished?" When Sun Xiaoyu heard these words in the class, his heart beat wildly. He shouted, "It's not my fault. What I said is the truth." "Enough." The teacher was furious. "Go to the office. The rest of you study by yourselves." Just like that, Li Jianrui was brought back to the classroom office. Sun Xiaoyu pouted reluctantly and muttered, "I'm so unlucky. Why did I have to meet such a busybody?" Li Jianrui's hearing was not bad. When she heard this, she turned around angrily. Sun Xiaoyu glared back fearlessly. But just as he was walking forward, he suddenly stumbled and his fat body fell forward. Sun Xiaoyu screamed. Then, the sound of a body falling to the ground was heard. The whole class cheered and looked at the person who caused Sun Xiaoyu's fall. Who else could it be but Quan Jingyi? Quan Jingyi slowly retracted his foot and apologized insincerely. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." His tone was cold and his gaze was indifferent. He looked at Sun Xiaoyu's eyes calmly without a hint of guilt. When Li Jianyue saw it, she found it hard to believe. Wasn't he doing it on purpose? Sun Xiaoyu, who was on the ground, raised his head. On his chubby face, 2 streaks of blood flowed down from his nose. Wow, Sun Xiaoyu's nose is bleeding. Exciting. Is Quan Jingyi a hero saving the damsel in distress? This Li Jianyue is way too charming. Sun Xiaoyu reached out his hand and wiped his nose. Only then did he see that his hand was covered in blood. The next second he burst into tears. As the female protagonist of the gossip, Li Jianyue felt a little pleased when she saw Sun Xiaoyu crying on the ground. The teacher was walking in front, walking a little fast. When he heard the commotion in the class, he quickly turned back. Seeing the scene, he trembled and shouted, "Quan Jingyi, get your ass over here too." Sun Xiaoyu got up from the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Quan Jingyi stood up from his seat. His gaze was calm and carefree. He looked at Li Jianyue and walked forward. Chapter 22-24. Sun Xiaoyu cried even more miserably and shouted, "Quan Jingyi, I'm not done with you." Quan Jingyi turned his head and looked at Sun Xiaoyu condescendingly. He said without sincerity, "I've already said that I didn't do it on purpose." The people in the class were not blind. Whether he did it on purpose or not, the eyes of the crowd could see it clearly. However, no one dared to speak up for Sun Xiaoyu. There were more people watching the show. The teacher dragged the 3 of them to the office and handed them over to their class teacher. Li Jianyue had never been scolded like this since she was young. The word meddlesome pierced her heart. As she spoke, she couldn't help but cry out of grievance. Sun Xiaoyu couldn't help but refute, "I didn't offend her. She just didn't want to sit with me. I can't do anything about it. I think she just wants to fall in love. Teacher, you have to discipline her." "You're talking nonsense." Li Jianyue cried and shouted, "You're the one who slept in class and likes to lean on my seat. Doesn't your conscience hurt saying such things?" "I'm also speaking the truth. Quan Jingyi even hit me just now. It's all because of you." "When did I hit you?" Quan Jingyi's voice finally sounded lazily, "I just accidentally stuck my foot out. It's your fault for not watching where you're going. Why are you blaming me?" Sun Xiaoyu was flustered and exasperated. "You're obviously quibbling." "Aren't you quibbling? You bullied your female desk mate and even framed her for falling in love. What kind of upbringing is that?" Quan Jingyi said coldly and sarcastically. Sun Xiaoyu's chubby face turned green and red. "You guys are in cahoots. You ganged up to bully me." "Enough." The teacher heard it and felt a headache coming on. Quan Jingyi had the worst reputation in the class. Moreover, he had indeed been desk mates with Li Jianyue. As a bad student, it was very possible for him to fall in love at a young age. However, Li Jianyue was the daughter of the school's biggest sponsor. It was said that Mr. Li had recently temporarily given the school 2 science laboratories and 2 new media classrooms. The teacher's dormitory building for the past 2 years was also sponsored by Mr. Li. Therefore, even if Li Jianyue was really in love, they couldn't let Sun Xiaoyu go around spouting nonsense. The teachers knew what was going on and immediately stopped Sun Xiaoyu. "Don't talk nonsense. Li Jianyue has always been a good student. Her morals are definitely better than yours. How can you frame a classmate? It's a fact that you slept in class. Do you still need to quibble?" Sun Xiaoyu cried out in grievance. "Li Jianyue was the one who bullied me. She even poked me with a pen many times. You can't let her off just because she's a girl." "You're still talking nonsense." The teacher's face was full of anger. "I don't know what kind of conflict you have with Quan Jingyi, but it's very low of you to implicate a female student in your conflict. Quickly apologize to Li Jianyue." "I don't want to. I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I apologize?" Sun Xiaoyu's attitude was very firm. "Quan Jingyi even bullied me. Look, my nose is bleeding." Quan Jingyi replied lazily, "I've already said that I didn't do it on purpose. Besides, didn't I already apologize? But you framed Li Jianyue and me at the same time. Shouldn't you apologize to me as well?" Quan Jingyi asked. Sun Xiaoyu was flustered and exasperated. He shouted, "Why should I apologize to you? I'm the victim." Reporting. A young boy wearing glasses walked in from the door of the office. It was Yang Zihao. Chapter 22-25. Yang Zihao walked in with his head bowed. He didn't even dare to look at them. Li Jianyue couldn't believe it and said, Nonsense. I didn't. Yang Zihao turned to look at her and quickly turned away in a panic. He said quickly, if you don't want people to know, don't do it. When Quan Jingyi saw Yang Zihao walk in, his eyes turned cold. When he saw his trademark glasses, he said in a low voice, how did you get my notebook? Yang Zihao said confidently and righteously, of course I saw it on your desk. My books are all in my school bag. Quan Jingyi's voice was a little low. At first glance it sounded a little indifferent. Going through a classmate's school bag without permission. Is this what your parents taught you? Then, his eyes suddenly turned cold and his tone became heavier. Taking without asking is stealing. Yang Zihao's expression changed. He turned to look at the teacher. The teacher frowned. Obviously, she didn't approve of Yang Zihao's behavior. Yang Zihao quickly said, Teacher, you should take a look at what he drew in the notebook first. What did he draw? Li Jianyue had an ominous feeling in her heart. She turned to look. The teacher had already taken the notebook from Yang Zihao's hands. Just as she was about to flip it open, Quan Jingyi suddenly reached out and pulled the notebook back. He said, this is my sketchbook. It involves my own privacy. Yang Zihao was delighted and said, Teacher, look. He's feeling guilty. Quan Jingyi's expression darkened. He turned to look at Yang Zihao and said, even a thief like you doesn't feel guilty. Why should I? The word thief was a little harsh. Yang Zihao's face turned slightly pale. You, Quan Jingyi, if you don't feel guilty, show me the notebook, the teacher said. You are still young. Puppy love must be stopped. Student Li is a good child. You can't be poisoned by bad classmates at such a young age. In a few words he had made his position clear. The teacher had already decided that Quan Jingyi was a bad child. He had been like this since he was young. Although Quan Jingyi was already used to such slander, he still felt a little embarrassed in front of Li Jianyue. Li Jianyue looked at Quan Jingyi and subconsciously looked at the sketchbook in his hand. What exactly was drawn on it that made Yang Zihao so certain and Quan Jingyi, who had always appeared indifferent, so concerned? Sun Xiaoyu, on the other hand, added fuel to the fire and said, Li Jianyue isn't a good classmate either. Teacher, don't be fooled by her appearance. This woman is very vicious. She poked me with the needle of the compass. Li Jianyue almost jumped up. When did I use a compass? Don't spout nonsense. The teacher didn't want to hear them talk about this. His eyes were still on Quan Jingyi. Quan Jingyi, let me take a look. Quan Jingyi's lips tightened. I have everything in my sketchbook. I don't want to show you. Yang Zihao, tell me, what did you see? I saw Quan Jingyi drawing Li Jianyue, and there was a woman's naked body in it. Yang Zihao's voice was a little loud. Quan Jingyi's expression darkened. Li Jianyue was also shocked. She couldn't help but look at Quan Jingyi a few more times. She didn't expect Quan Jingyi to be such a person. Chapter 22-26. The way Li Jianyue looked at him made Quan Jingyi feel very uncomfortable. Even though everyone looked at him the same way, Li Jianyue's gaze was the only one that he couldn't accept. When the teacher heard Yang Zihao's words, her expression darkened. She looked at Quan Jingyi and said, Quan Jingyi, this matter has now escalated to a matter of character. You'd better show it to me. Otherwise you might be seen as a pervert. When he heard the words pervert and pervert, Quan Jingyi's expression darkened even more. Yang Zihao and Sun Xiaoyu looked at each other. They could see in each other's eyes that they were rejoicing in the other's misfortune. Yang Zihao pushed up his glasses and added fuel to the fire. He's a pervert. Teacher, I think this kind of black sheep should be expelled. Don't go too far. What did Quan Jingyi do? You were the one who started the fight with you. It's not like you don't know how Sun Xiaoyu bullied me. How dare someone like you write me a love letter? How disgusting. Li Jianyue was furious. Yang Zihao's face turned pale and he immediately denied, what nonsense are you talking about? When did I write you a love letter? Don't think too highly of yourself. Think highly of myself? This was the first time Li Jianyue had heard someone use this term to describe her. She was so angry that her face turned red and she said, I still have the love letter. You wrote it? You said that your friend gave it to me. I only found out later that you were Yang Zihao. You even wanted me to be your girlfriend? Yang Zihao stepped forward and gave her a shove. He said in a panic, don't talk nonsense. Quan Jingyi's face darkened. He had already stepped forward to stop Yang Zihao. His tall figure appeared especially burly in front of the thin Yang Zihao. He looked down at him and said, You're angry from embarrassment. The teacher is still here. She turned her head and saw that the teacher's face had indeed turned purple. Li Jianyue, what's going on? Li Jianhua told the whole story in detail and added, "My brother doesn't allow me to date at a young age, so I blocked his WeChat. I can get my brother to testify for me. He's in grade 12. His name is Li Mosin." Upon hearing Li Mosin's name, the teacher's expression softened a little. Li Mosin is a good boy. He ranks first in his grade every year and has won a lot of collective honors for the school. His character is commendable. He is indeed a very good boy. Yang Zihao panicked. "Teacher, That's enough." The teacher waved his hand impatiently. "That's another matter. Quan Jingyi, show me your drawing first." Although Quan Jingyi was reluctant, after meeting Li Jianhua's strange gaze, he finally compromised and handed over the painting in his hand. The teacher took it and casually flipped through it. It was a painting that had clearly been completed not long ago. This was a pen drawing. There were not many lines used, but these few lines were enough to outline a young girl. She was smiling sweetly and had a pair of rabbit ears on top of her head. She held an ice cream in her hand and looked extremely happy and charmingly naive. It was dated a few days ago. Li Jianhua had obviously seen it too. When she saw herself appear on his drawing, Li Jianhua was obviously shocked. However, she quickly felt a little surprised and said, "You're so cute. I didn't know you were so good at drawing." The teacher nodded in agreement with Li Jianhua's words. Quan Jingyi was surprised by their reactions. Chapter 22-27. Indeed, not only was it similar, but it was also particularly lifelike. Just these simple lines alone were enough to show the charm of the girl on the paper. It was so lifelike that the artist's drawing skills were amazing. "Li Jianhua is beautiful, but we are not familiar with each other. It would be too abrupt to ask her to be a model, so I could only draw it from memory." This sentence contained several meanings. Firstly, it said that they were not familiar with each other. Secondly, it meant that he did not ask Li Jianhua to be a model. Yang Zihao noticed that the teacher did not react and became even more anxious. He said, "Teacher, look at the front. There is even a nude body. Quan Jingyi is a dirty and wretched person." The teacher flipped over and indeed there was a nude body. Yang Zihao saw the nude sketch and looked at Quan Jingyi proudly. Unexpectedly, Quan Jingyi was not very nervous. He was nervous and uneasy when he refused to open the book just now. It seemed that he did not want others to see Li Jianhua's portrait. But after the portrait was seen, it did not matter. Yang Zihao realized this and suddenly guessed that they were not dating as he had imagined. But Quan Jingyi had a crush on Li Jianhua? Yang Zihao suddenly came to a realization. When he came to his senses again, he met Quan Jingyi's eyes. There was disdain in his eyes as he looked at little Four condescendingly. The coldness in his eyes seemed to crush him to death. Yang Zihao's heart trembled and he did not dare to look at him. He hurriedly turned his head to look at the teacher. The teacher was looking at the drawing and said, "This is the famous nude sculpture in the textbook. Is this the nude body you were talking about?" Yang Zihao's heart beat faster and he said in a panic, "There's more. There's more." The teacher opened the book again and there was indeed another drawing. This one was completely nude. However, the teacher had a little knowledge of art and could immediately recognize that it was a copy that had won international art awards in recent years. The teacher looked at the drawing again and again. She could not hide the admiration in her eyes and said, "Not bad. How long have you been learning?" Quan Jingyi relaxed a little and said honestly, "My father did not allow me to learn." "You have not learned?" "I secretly learned a little." Quan Jingyi looked at the teacher. "I figured it out myself." The teacher's eyes were filled with even more admiration. He closed the book and said, "Your talent is too strong. Why didn't your father let you learn it?" Quan Jingyi kept his mouth shut. The teacher didn't ask any more questions. He looked at Yang Zihao. Yang Zihao hadn't expected such an outcome. His face paled in embarrassment. "Teacher? Student Yang, I think it's necessary to communicate with your parents and ask them to give you more training in the arts." Yang Zihao's face turned red and white. He was extremely embarrassed. He lowered his head and didn't dare to speak. "Teacher," Quan Jingyi said, "I don't blame him for being ignorant, but he should not have slandered the pure friendship between me and classmate Li. In order to avoid misunderstandings, I didn't even say a word to classmate Li after changing seats. I drew this painting based on my own memory. I didn't expect that someone would still use it as a stain to slander me. Now that I'm only in high school, I've already learned such evil practices. What will I do in the future?" It was the first time that Li Jianhua and the teacher heard Quan Jingyi say such a long speech. They couldn't help but look at him. He was usually a man of few words and was lazy. Who would have thought that Quan Jingyi would be so eloquent? Chapter 22-28. Yang Zihao was so ashamed that he couldn't even lift his head. When he heard Li Jianyue's words, he raised his head hesitantly and looked at Quan Jingyi. Quan Jingyi was very tall. He seemed to have developed abnormally at this age in his first year of high school. However, it was undeniable that Quan Jingyi was much taller than him. He could feel that he was being looked down upon just by standing in front of him. This feeling made him feel disgusted for no reason. His hostility towards Quan Jingyi rose in his heart. The teacher nodded. Indeed, you should apologize. Student Yang, I don't know what conflict you have with Quan Jingyi, but it's wrong of you to frame two people who have no relationship with each other for no reason. Yang Zihao was indignant. But they are clearly together. Otherwise, why would Li Jianyue bully Sun Xiaoyu just to sit with Li Jianyue again? When Sun Xiaoyu heard this, he immediately said, "That's right, teacher. Li Jianyue bullies me every day." Li Jianyue said, "I didn't." Enough. The teacher was a little impatient. Yang Zihao apologized to Quan Jingyi first. In the future, you should broaden your horizons. Don't make a fool out of yourself and accuse Quan Jingyi for no reason. Yang Zihao's face was like a palette of red, white, green, and purple. Looking at him, he finally lowered his head reluctantly and said, "I'm sorry." His voice wasn't loud. Quan Jingyi looked down at the back of his head and asked, "What?" Yang Zihao felt even more humiliated. He said loudly, "I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm ignorant. I've wronged you. Can I?" As he spoke, his eyes under the glasses were already red. He glared at Li Jianyue and walked out of the office without saying a word. The teacher frowned. Yang Zihao. However, Yang Zihao ignored her and ran out. Sun Xiaoyu didn't dare to say a word. He looked at them and said weakly, "Teacher, I'll leave too." "No, you can't leave," the teacher said. "The matter between you and Li Jianyue hasn't been resolved yet. Didn't you just say that Quan Jingyi hit you?" "I didn't," Quan Jingyi said calmly. "I just accidentally tripped him. It's his fault for not looking at the road." Sun Xiaoyu was exasperated. "You still dare to say that? You clearly did it on purpose." "If I say it's not, then it's not." Quan Jingyi glanced at him coldly. "It's up to you to believe it or not." Sun Xiaoyu's plump body shrank back. His face was full of anger, but there was nothing he could do. The teacher said, "Quan Jingyi, watch your attitude. No matter what, it's a fact that you tripped Sun Xiaoyu. You should apologize." Quan Jingyi pursed his lips and looked at Sun Xiaoyu. "I'm sorry. It's my fault for growing so tall and having such long legs. I apologize to you here. But next time, please pay attention when you walk. After all, my legs can't fit under the desk. I can only stretch my legs into the aisle." Sun Xiaoyu felt wronged. He looked at the teacher and said, "Who would apologize like this? Why don't I use Yang Zihao's apology as a reference and repeat it for you?" Quan Jingyi looked sincere. Sun Xiaoyu immediately suppressed his grievances. "All right, I know that Li Jianyue won't bully her desk mate. Since you two can't get along, I'll change your seats. Go back first." The students looked at each other and quickly walked out of the office. Sun Xiaoyu had already run away, leaving Li Jianyue and Quan Jingyi behind. Chapter 22-29. "I was working part-time that day," Quan Jingyi replied calmly. Li Jianyue was surprised. "You were working part-time?" "Yeah." Quan Jingyi walked forward lazily. He was completely different from the calm and determined person he was in the office. "I was selling some small accessories. You bought them from me before." "Ah," Li Jianyue suddenly remembered. "I bought them from Kumaman Bears. Were you wearing Kumaman Bears clothes that day? You were the one who sold the rabbit ears to me." Quan Jingyi nodded slightly. He admitted it. "Wow, so that's how it is." Li Jianyue was surprised. "Then why didn't you call me?" "So it was you. You're amazing." "Amazing." "Yeah, you're amazing." Li Jianyue's face was full of admiration. "You have school and a part-time job. It's such a hot day. You're wearing so many clothes and standing in a place with so many people. I can't stand it just thinking about it. My grandfather always said that you have to go through hardships to become a better person. You're starting to train yourself now. You're really amazing." Quan Jingyi listened to Li Jianyue's sincere words and smiled. "I'm working part-time because I want to earn money." "Earn money?" Li Jianyue looked at him and blinked. "Doesn't your father give you money?" "Yeah." Quan Jingyi walked forward. "It doesn't matter. If he doesn't give me money, I can earn it myself." "Then why doesn't your father give you money?" Li Jianyue chased after him. "I heard from your classmates that you don't have a good relationship with your father. Is it because your father doesn't want to teach you how to draw and you still want to draw?" Is that why your relationship is bad? Li Jinrui's voice was filled with doubt and innocence. Quan Jingyi turned his head and saw Li Jinrui's pink face with doubt and curiosity. That's only part of the reason. What's the other part? Li Jinrui asked curiously. Quan Jingyi paused and realized that Li Jinrui was quite short. Now that she was standing, the top of her head couldn't reach his chin. Li Jinrui thought that he didn't want to tell her and said, "It's okay if you don't want to tell me. I'm just curious. It's okay if you don't want to tell me." Quan Jingyi pursed his lips. "There's nothing I can't say. You've probably heard it from them. My biological mother died. My father married a stepmother for me. Stepmother gave birth to a younger brother." "Yeah." Li Jinrui nodded. What she knew was that his father had married a stepmother, but she didn't know that the stepmother had given birth to a younger brother. "When my stepmother was in confinement, I argued with her." Li Jinrui's eyes widened. "You really shouldn't have done that. My mom said that a woman shouldn't get angry when she's in confinement. If she gets angry at this time, the sequelae will last a lifetime." "That's right." When Li Jinrui heard her mother say this, she couldn't help but feel proud of her mother. Because her mother met a good man, she was taking good care of both times she gave birth. Quan Jingyi lowered his eyes slightly and responded. Li Jinrui saw that Quan Jingyi seemed to be in a low mood and felt that she had made him unhappy. She immediately said, "But I believe that you wouldn't talk back to her for no reason." "Why is that?" "Because she wanted to throw away my mother's photo." Li Jinrui was shocked. "It can't be. Did your mother's photo obstruct her? Then why don't you hide it?" Chapter 2230. How could she do that? Li Jinrui's face was full of anger. "She's too disrespectful. It's already too much to enter your room without your permission. She even went through your drawer and through your things. She's so uncultured." Quan Jingyi smiled bitterly. "I said the same thing." Li Jinrui's voice faltered. "And then?" "Then I argued with her a little," Quan Jingyi said nonchalantly. He smiled. "Then she threw all the paintings I secretly drew in front of my dad." Li Jinrui was furious when she heard that. "How could she do that? You're such a bad stepmother." Quan Jingyi looked at her pouting and angry face. He actually thought that she was a little cute. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Why are you so angry? It's not like you treated her like that." "Of course I'm angry. I always knew that stepmothers were bad, but I didn't expect them to go so far." "All right, go back to the classroom." Quan Jingyi turned around and was about to go down the corridor. He quickly went down the stairs with his back facing Li Jinrui. "Where are you going?" Li Jinrui followed and couldn't help but say, "I'm still in class. It's the homeroom teacher's class later." "I'm going for a walk." "I'll go with you." Li Jinrui was by his side. She quickly went around to him. "You haven't told me why your father doesn't let you learn how to draw. Isn't your father the mayor?" "My father said that the higher a person's social status is, the more importance they attach to the harmony of their family and the education of their descendants. Why doesn't your father attach importance to the harmony of your family? He doesn't even allow you to paint. Even the teacher praised you for your talent. If you continue to paint, you might even become an artist." Quan Jingyi was speechless. That's right. Li Jinrui's petite body, coupled with her appearance that was even more childish than her peers, made her look especially childish in front of him. She looked especially like a child. Quan Jingyi's heartbeat inexplicably sped up at this moment. Looking at her as happy as a bird, he tilted his head slightly. His ears unconsciously felt a little hot, but he maintained the same expression on his face and said, "My mother is a painter." "Wow, no wonder you are so talented. My mom can play the piano very well. She also knows how to cook and knows many languages. She often travels with my dad. So my brother is also very good. He knows everything my mom knows and he knows everything my dad knows. There's also my brother. Although he looks chubby, he is very smart. My grandpa said that he will become an excellent scout in the future, the kind with sharp ears and eyes. These are all inherited. Your mother must be very talented and she must be very good-looking." Li Jinrui smiled and tilted her head to look at him as she walked backward. Quan Jingyi listened to her words and chuckled. "Why do you say that? You are very good-looking. I saw your father last time. He wasn't as good-looking as you, so you must have inherited it from your mother." Quan Jingyi nodded with a smile. "Indeed, my mother is very beautiful and very gentle, but she is very rebellious and very bold." "Do you know how she died?" Li Jinrui's eyes widened. She didn't expect him to be willing to talk about this. She immediately shook her head and waited for Quan Jingyi's answer. Quan Jingyi looked into the distance. The wind blew and swept the ends of his hair on his forehead, making his facial features look a little lonely. When I was 3 years old, she went outdoors to sketch and there was an earthquake. Chapter 2231. An earthquake. Li Jianyue was a little scared. People always instinctively felt awe for natural disasters that couldn't be avoided or predicted. Yes. Quan Jingyi looked into the distance and narrowed his eyes slightly. My memory of her is only the photos I saw when I was young. She was very beautiful and very gentle. However, he never saw her again. All his memories of his mother were left with his father's blame, his stepmother's slander, and his grandmother's regret and heartache. He didn't know who was telling the truth and who was lying. But in the depths of his heart, he thought more than once that his mother must be a gentle, kind, and beautiful woman. Quan Jingyi's thoughts gradually drifted away. At this moment, it seemed that he was surrounded by his world. Just as Quan Jingyi was distracted, he suddenly felt a slight warmth on his body. Quan Jingyi was stunned. He looked down and saw a black head at a glance. His heart was beating fast. At this moment, an indescribable throbbing made it difficult for him to remain calm. Subconsciously, Quan Jingyi wanted to reach out and hug her in his arms. However, this impulse was quickly suppressed by his rationality. Li Jianyue didn't think much about it. She just suddenly felt a little sad. She felt that Quan Jingyi, who lacked maternal love, was actually very fragile. She gave him a gentle hug and said softly, "Your mother must be a very good person. Don't be sad. She will watch you quietly from heaven and wait for you to grow up." Quan Jingyi suppressed the throbbing and ripples in his heart and smiled. "You still believe this?" Li Jianyue heard his smiling voice and felt that she was being mocked. She raised her face and let go of him. She said angrily, "Why not? What everyone is saying must be true. When I was young, great-grandfather doted on me. Later he passed away. I was very sad. My mother said that great-grandfather didn't leave us. He just went to another place to watch us." Li Jianyue said very seriously. Her pink face was full of sincerity. Quan Jingyi smiled slightly. "Yes." When the bell rang, Li Jianyue immediately smiled. "Let's go. Class is starting." "It's too late," Quan Jingyi said. "It takes 5 minutes to get to the classroom from here." What should we do then?" Li Jianyue's face fell. She was a little anxious. "This is the class teacher's class. If we're late, we'll be scolded. What else can we do?" Quan Jingyi held her hand. "Run." Before Li Jianyue could react, she was dragged away. She was so shocked that she staggered and shouted, "Hey!" The two of them ran all the way. Li Jianyue's long hair was blown by the wind. Under the sun, it was as if a black wave had been splashed. It was eye-catching. Lu Yuanyang was twirling a basketball in his sportswear at the entrance to the top class of senior year on the 3rd floor. He saw two people running down the stairs and thought they looked familiar. "Hey Mosen, isn't that your little princess?" Li Mosen was stretching his muscles and bones. He walked over and looked down. At a glance, he saw the figure that went deep into his bones. Li Mosen frowned and subconsciously looked at the boy's appearance. From the side of his face, it could be seen that this boy was very good-looking and tall. He was Ursa's desk mate Quan Jingyi. Lu Yuanyang whistled and said, "Are they dating? They look like they're a good match, but..." "Shut up." A low shout made Lu Yuanyang's heart skip a beat. He looked sideways and saw that Li Mosen's face had darkened. Chapter 2232. Li Mosen's footsteps were very fast. Before Zhongyi and Lu Yuanyang could catch up, he was already downstairs. Li Mosen stopped abruptly when he saw the boy and girl sprinting in front of him. They were running in the direction of the Year 1 building. And Quan Jingyi and Li Jianyue were classmates. They were just going to class. What was he thinking? With Li Jianyue's brain, she would never date in the first year of high school. What was he worried about? Li Mosen watched their backs disappear at the end of the building. His heart finally calmed down. But his heart was still in turmoil. He was impulsive. Just now, Li Mosen realized that he couldn't calm down at all. Zhongyi and Lu Yuanyang finally caught up. Looking at Li Mosen's back, they heaved a sigh of relief. Lu Yuanyang said, "You scared me to death. I thought you were going to beat up that kid." Zhongyi patted his chest, still in shock. "I thought so too. Fortunately it's not. But the little princess is all grown up now. She's in the first year of high school. It's normal for her to date. You shouldn't interfere too much." Lu Yuanyang nodded in agreement. "Especially since the little princess is so pretty. There will only be more and more suitors. You can control one, but you can't control 2 or 3. It's better to let her be." Anyway, it's high school. Dating is just for fun. Before he finished speaking, Zhang Yi suddenly touched Lu Yuanyang. Lu Yuanyang was a little angry because of the force. But when he turned his head, he saw Zhang Yi giving him a look. Following Zhang Yi's gaze, Lu Yuanyang saw the dark look on Li Mosen's face. Li Mosen had a mixed-race face, snow-white skin, delicate and clean, blue eyes and long eyelashes. But at this moment, there was only monstrous anger in his eyes. Lu Yuanyang was so scared that he didn't dare to make a sound. Li Mosen didn't say anything. He didn't even look at them. He just walked away. Zhang Yi and Lu Yuanyang followed behind him. They looked at each other, still in shock. Lu Yuanyang mouthed, "What's wrong?" Zhang Yi thought for a moment and guessed, maybe he's angry because his sister is in a relationship and he doesn't have a girlfriend? Lu Yuanyang was amused. However, he knew that things were not as simple as they seemed. The two of them pondered for a moment before deciding to follow. It was a physical education class. As the physical education representative, Li Mosen was usually very prestigious in the class. At this time when he gave orders, he was also merciless. After 10 laps of the track, everyone was exhausted. However, traditional medicine doctor and Lu Yuanyang had to play basketball with them. In the end, they were so exhausted that they didn't even look human. Finally, when school was over, Li Mosen was the first to leave. Both Zhonghua and Lu Yuanyang realized that Li Mosen's destination was clear. He was heading to year 1. On Li Jianyue's side, she had never tried to go to class on time. When she arrived at the classroom, the teacher was already in the classroom. When she saw Quan Jingyi and Li Jianyue running in together, she looked at them critically. Finally, her gaze fell on their hands. Li Jianyue then realized that her hand was still being held by Quan Jingyi. Li Jianyue was so frightened that she quickly flung his hand away and ran to her seat. Sun Xiaoyu's gaze was very strange. He looked at Quan Jingyi and then at Li Jianyue with disdain. Chapter 2233. Li Jianrui noticed Yang Ziheo's gaze and couldn't help but feel a little strange. She was a little angry but also a little baffled. She had never offended him. She had only rejected his confession. Was he going to be like this? Li Jianrui thought about it and felt that it was a little unreasonable. So when she passed by him, she couldn't help but glare at him before stomping in. Sun Xiaoyu, change seats with Wang Caijie, the teacher said. After changing seats, class will begin. Wang Caijie was a little surprised and asked the teacher, "Why? Don't you know that Sun Xiaoyu and Li Jianrui just quarreled? Since Sun Xiaoyu can't get along with female students, then sit with male students and change seats." Wang Caijie was a little unwilling, but she looked at the teacher and took out her bag. She moved her books to Li Jianrui's seat. Sun Xiaoyu was also moving things. As he moved things, he muttered, "Why don't you say that it's Li Jianrui's problem? It's obvious that Li Jianrui doesn't welcome me and has been bullying me. The teacher is just biased." His voice wasn't soft, so Li Jianrui also heard it. She said angrily, "It's obviously you who bullied me. How dare you say that? How did I bully you? It's obviously you. You wanted to sit with Quan Jingyi, so you found an excuse. Now you're not sitting with Quan Jingyi. You're also very disappointed, aren't you?" Sun Xiaoyu's voice was slightly harsh. Li Jianrui glared at him angrily, but her long years of upbringing prevented her from saying anything particularly harsh. "All right, be quiet." The teacher patted the podium. "It's time for class. If you continue to quarrel, do the questions." Only then did Sun Xiaoyu quiet down and move the table reluctantly. Under Yang Ziheo's thick glasses, a pair of small eyes looked at Quan Jingyi. As for Quan Jingyi, he was still sitting in his original seat. At this moment, when he returned to his seat, he lazily leaned on the table, looking half dead as usual. Sensing Yang Ziheo's gaze, Quan Jingyi raised his eyebrows slightly. His lazy gaze drifted over with a hint of provocation. It looked a little annoying. Yang Ziheo was angry when he saw him. He turned his head and ignored him. Soon it was the end of class. When school was over, Li Jianrui was still packing her things. She heard Wang Caijie's voice. "Senior Mosen?" The first person Li Jianyue thought of was her brother. She looked sideways and sure enough, she saw the exquisite mixed-race face at a glance. However, Li Mosen did not look very happy at this time. His face was gloomy and very ugly. When he walked into the classroom, the strong aura around him, which had been influenced by Li Xiqing for many years, seemed out of place in this classroom. But it was also this kind of aura that made the hearts of the surrounding female students palpitate uncontrollably. Looking at Li Mosen's tall and strong figure, their faces and ears flushed red, unable to control themselves. Li Jianyue looked at her brother in front of her. She was already used to this. She blinked her eyes and asked, "What's wrong? Are you unhappy today?" Hearing her sweet voice, Li Mosen pursed his rosy lips into a thin line again and replied, "Yes, I'm not happy." Li Jianyue finally finished packing her school bag. Just as she was about to put it on her back, Li Mosen took it away. Li Jianyue looked at Li Mosen and asked, "Why?" Chapter 2234. It was rare for Li Mosen to express his emotions so directly. Li Jianyue thought that something terrible must have happened for Brother Mosen to be in such a bad mood. After Li Mosen said that, he did not say another word. He carried Li Jianyue's school bag and walked forward without saying a word. The moment he walked out of the classroom, Li Jianyue heard cheers coming from the classroom behind her. "Ah, so handsome. Is that Li Jianyue's brother? Our school's hunk, the president of the student council and a top student. He has won many awards for our school in the past few years. The principal has been praising him. I heard that the people from T University next door have come to poach him. The people from Tsinghua University also want to recommend him." Li Jianyue did not hear much, but the voices of these fangirls were too loud. She could not pretend not to hear them. She caught up with Li Mosen in a few steps and shouted, "Brother?" Li Mosen's lips pursed even deeper, and the displeasure on his face became even stronger. Li Jianyue shouted again, "Brother Mosen." Li Mosen finally turned to look at her and asked, "What is it? Why are you unhappy?" Li Jianyue felt a little puzzled. In her memory, Li Mosen did not seem to be so emotional, and Li Mosen did not want to explain. He took a step forward and said, "Let's go home first." Li Jianyue quickly caught up with him like a little tail. Just like before. This understanding made Li Mosen feel a little more at ease. But the next moment he saw Quan Jingyi. Quan Jingyi was wearing a school uniform. Compared to the other boys in year 1, Quan Jingyi's development was too good. He was tall and had long legs. The school uniform looked a little small on him. He looked a little sloppy, but he had a different kind of mischievous aura. The moment he saw Quan Jingyi, Li Mosen's mood, which had not been easy to calm down, instantly fell to the bottom of the abyss. Quan Jingyi raised his eyebrows slightly. Obviously he did not understand why Li Mosen was so hostile to him. When Li Jianyue saw Quan Jingyi, she blinked her eyes. Before she could say anything, Li Mosen grabbed her arm tightly. Before Li Jianyue could react, she was pulled by the boy and her body fell forward. Li Mosen was tall and had long legs. His footsteps were big and he was strong. Li Jianyue let out a cry as she was pulled along. Then she could only run behind Li Mosen in small steps. "Brother Mosen, slow down." But Li Mosen didn't seem to hear it and his footsteps became faster. Li Jianyue felt aggrieved. Li Mosen had always been very obedient to her. No matter what happened, he was always obedient to her. This was the first time he had dragged her along like this. Li Jianyue pouted. When she reached the end of the run, she panted and shouted, "Brother Mosen." Li Mosen stopped in his tracks. Li Jianyue was caught off guard. Her nose bumped into his back. It was so painful that tears came out of her eyes. It was too fucking hard. Li Jianyue rubbed her little nose. Her face was full of grievance and she almost cried. Tears welled up in her eyes. Chapter 2235. Li Jianyue was stunned by the question. "Huh?" Li Mosen looked at her with a sullen expression. But when he saw the cute expression on her fair and tender face, his mood eased a little. He asked, "Is that so?" Li Jianyue immediately shook her head. She shook her head like a drum and shouted, "Of course not. How can I fall in love? Daddy and Mommy said that I can't fall in love at such a young age." Yeah. Li Mosen's mood finally improved a lot. There was a look of relief on his face. He reached out and patted her little head. "That's good. You're still young. You can't be led astray by these people, okay?" When Li Jianyue heard this, she pouted and muttered, "How can it be so easy to be led astray? And if it's really puppy love, it's not considered being led astray." "Isn't this considered being led astray?" Li Mosen raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a straight face, "At your age you don't know anything. If you really fall in love, it's very easy to be deceived. I'm also doing this for your own good." Come on, for my own good," Li Jianyue muttered. "Aren't you afraid that my falling in love will affect my studies?" Don't worry, I won't fall in love at such a young age. I must do well in my exams. You and my brother are both top students. I can't be a bad student." "It's good to have this awareness." Li Mosen touched her head. His voice couldn't help but soften. "Now you should focus on your studies. Therefore she couldn't fall in love at such a young age. He wouldn't allow it. Li Jianyue walked away angrily. As she walked, she rubbed her little nose. Li Mosen looked at her cute little face and smiled. His hand couldn't help but touch his heart. His heart, which had been restless for a whole day, returned to normal in an instant. But Li Mosen's eyes narrowed. The sloppy look of Quan Jingyi just now appeared in front of him. He had to admit that Quan Jingyi was indeed good-looking. Not only his appearance but his height, physique, figure, and even his athletic talent were outstanding. Such a person was Ursu's classmate. The two of them were so close. This was really worrying. But very quickly, Li Mosen suppressed the emotions in his heart and followed Li Jianyue. Li Jianyue and Li Mosen had always shared a bicycle. The back seat of this bicycle was very soft and comfortable. Moreover, the feeling of being in contact with nature and the wind made Li Jianyue very happy. Until now she was not willing to change. But today the back seat of the bicycle was cut into pieces by someone with a scissors or something like a blade. When Li Jianyue saw it, her eyes widened in disbelief. She quickly ran up and shouted, "Who did it?" Li Mosen also walked up. When he saw this scene, his teeth suddenly clenched. When Li Jianyue saw the sponge that was exposed inside, her heart ached so much that her eyes turned red. She stomped her feet angrily and said, "Who's so evil to cut off my throne?" Li Mosen frowned and looked at other places. He found that the other places were safe and sound. Even the tires and leather seat of the bike were in good condition. Only the back seat was damaged beyond recognition. Li Jianyue was on the verge of tears. She shouted, "You're definitely targeting me. You just don't want me to sit in your car." Chapter 2236. Li Jianyue had always known that her brother was very popular with girls, but it didn't mean that she could accept such damage. She liked this throne very much. The more Li Jianyue thought about it, the more aggrieved she felt. She pouted and her eyes turned red. She choked and shouted, "What should we do now?" Li Mosen's face darkened. He walked to Li Jianyue's side and gently put his arm around her shoulder. He said, "The school has surveillance cameras. We can see who did it." Li Jianyue sniffed. "But how are we going to go back today? It's so damaged that we can't even sit on it." Li Mosen pursed his lips and said, "Let's walk back." "No," Li Jianyue pouted. "It'll take half an hour to walk home. Mom and Dad are still waiting for us to come home for dinner." Su Qianxi and Li Xiqing didn't spend much time at home. They were either on business trips or traveling. The couple was very carefree and happy. It wasn't easy for them to be at home, but they still couldn't get home in time. Li Jianyue's heart was about to die. "Let Uncle pick us up. There's no hurry." Li Mosen patted Li Jianyue's shoulder gently. "I'll make a call and take the opportunity to see who's behind it." Li Jianyue's face was full of reluctance, but this was the only way now. Just as they were about to walk to the security booth, a bicycle came toward them from not far away. Li Jianyue looked at the person and blinked. Quan Jingyi was wearing a school uniform that didn't fit him very well, but his youthful aura was still very strong. He looked at Li Jianyue and raised his thick eyebrows slightly. He looked at the back seat that had been destroyed beyond recognition and asked, "Do you want me to send you back?" Li Jianyue was a little surprised. This guy was actually so kind? It was really surprising. Li Jianyue looked at the back seat of his bicycle and found that it was also very comfortable and soft. For a moment she couldn't help but feel a little tempted. Looking at the back seat, she blinked and asked, "Your house doesn't live with mine." "It's on the way," Quan Jingyi said lightly. "No need." Li Mosen walked over with cold eyes and said calmly, "Thank you, classmate Quan, but I've already called our driver. He'll come to pick us up soon." "Oh," Quan Jingyi shrugged, looking indifferent. "Forget it then." Li Jianyue felt a little pity. Actually, she didn't want to take a car. Bicycles were the most comfortable. On the way back they could watch the sunset and enjoy the breeze. It was very comfortable. However, she couldn't trouble Quan Jingyi to send her back. She had no choice but to follow Li Mosen's words and said, "Our driver will be here soon. You should go back quickly." Quan Jingyi smiled faintly and said, "Remember to remove me from your phone's blacklist. I'll send you the portrait today." "Portraits?" Li Jianyue's eyes lit up. "The portrait? Is it the one you drew of me sitting on the Ferris wheel?" "Yes." Li Mosen's gaze was slightly sinister as he coldly glanced at Quan Jingyi. Quan Jingyi acted as if he didn't see it and said, "Yes, there are a few more. If you want them, I'll send them to you together." Li Mosen's tone was unfriendly as he asked, "Why did you draw her?" Quan Jingyi was unexpectedly calm. He said calmly, "She's pretty." She looks beautiful when you draw her. Chapter 2237. Why don't you pull me out of the blacklist? Quan Jingyi looked down at her. In front of him was her dark little head, which carried a faint fragrance. It smelled good and he was in a good mood. I can't send it out now and you can't receive my message. Li Jinrui was a little surprised. Have we already added each other on WeChat? Why didn't I know? Quan Jingyi glanced at Li Mosen's increasingly ugly expression. He pretended not to see it and said, we added each other last time. I added it from Yang Ziheo's phone. Li Jinrui suddenly understood. So that's how it is. I thought it was Yang Ziheo's friend because the last time Yang Ziheo gave me a love letter, he said it was from his friend. Later I found out that the love letter was from him. His WeChat is also his own. As she spoke, Li Jinrui had already taken out her phone and asked, which one is it? Li Mosen didn't say anything. He looked down at their interaction. He clenched his fist slightly and then loosened it again. He said calmly, the purpose of you coming here is to get Ursu to pull you out of the blacklist? Quan Jingyi was also a man. Naturally, he could easily sense the unhappiness in Li Mosen's words. For some reason Quan Jingyi was in a good mood. He said, no. Meeting Li Mosen's cold and gloomy eyes, Quan Jingyi smiled carelessly and said, I saw you standing here and thought you might need help. As for the portraits and blacklisting, it's just a matter of convenience. Your car was clearly there. How did you know that our car was damaged? Li Mosen's voice was slightly low. He looked at him and said in a low voice, do you know who did it? Li Jinrui, who was playing with her phone, also looked up. Li Jinrui's face was full of anger. She shouted, yes, who? Do you know who it is? It's too hateful. It must be a girl. No, Quan Jingyi said calmly. Then it's a boy? Li Mosen looked at Quan Jingyi with his blue eyes narrowed. There was a bit of malice in his words. He said with some speculation, could it be you? Li Jinrui's eyes widened. No way. Speaking of this, Li Jinrui immediately remembered some bad rumors about Quan Jingyi. Bad boy, hooligan, delinquent, gangster. With all these labels attached together, it seemed normal to do such a thing? Li Jinrui suddenly felt a little scared and angry at the same time. Why did you do this? Quan Jingyi looked at the angry expression on her delicate face and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said, I wouldn't do something so senseless. Is that so? Li Mosen's voice was indifferent. Since you saw who did it just now, why didn't you stop him? I didn't see it. Quan Jingyi squinted at him. I'm just guessing. I believe you've already seen it. Li Jinrui looked at him. Chapter 2238. Sun Xiaoyu? Indeed, Sun Xiaoyu was indeed the person who had the most motive to do such a thing. After hearing Quan Jingyi's words, even her thoughts became very clear. Li Jinrui said angrily, this Sun Xiaoyu is too bad. Why did he do that? Because he hates you, Quan Jingyi said with a faint smile. After all, you just embarrassed him in public. But it wasn't me. Li Jinrui was furious. It was you who deliberately stretched out your leg when he walked over and pretended to be innocent. You're the worst. I didn't. Quan Jingyi's voice was faint with a hint of a lazy smile. I really didn't do it on purpose. The table was too small and couldn't fit my legs. What else could I do? Hearing this, Li Jinrui subconsciously looked at Quan Jingyi's legs. Indeed, it looked a little long. As the tallest person in the class, Quan Jingyi could indeed say such words. Quan Jingyi felt her gaze and naturally withdrew his legs. Stop looking. It's longer than you can imagine. What? Li Jinrui muttered. But she felt a little happy in her heart. It turned out that Quan Jingyi was also someone who could say such words. She really didn't notice it usually. It seemed that after today's events, the distance between them had unknowingly narrowed a lot. And when Mosen saw the faint smile on Li Jinrui's lips, he became more and more annoyed. It's time to go home, Li Mosen's voice was faint. Let's go. Li Jinrui pouted. The car broke down. It'll be fine tomorrow. Uncle Yang will be here soon. Li Mosen looked not far away. Coincidentally, a low-profile black business car was driving in their direction. If you don't want to take the car, I can give you a ride, Quan Jingyi said. The young man's voice was exceptionally clear. Anyway, it's on the way. Li Jinrui really didn't want to take the car. When she heard Quan Jingyi's words, she thought about where Quan Jingyi's home was. But the next moment, she heard Li Mosen's voice. No, it's too troublesome. Thank you for your kindness. Li Jinrui also felt that it was a little troublesome. Although she still wanted to agree, she felt that it was not a good idea. After all, although they had known each other for a while, they were not very familiar with each other. She could only echo Li Mosen's words and said, "Thank you, but forget it. We can go back by ourselves." As soon as he finished speaking, the family car arrived. Li Mosen opened the car door for Li Jianyue in a gentlemanly manner, revealing the retro and comfortable high-class interior. This was the car Grandma had prepared for them to send them to school. But who knew that none of the children in the family were willing to take a car? They rode their bicycles and left. Li Moyun was even more exaggerated. He took out a small electric scooter from nowhere and sped to school every day. He was happy and happy. When Li Jianyue saw the comforting middle-aged and elderly people inside, she didn't want to go in. She pouted and waved goodbye to Quan Jingyi before getting into her own car. Quan Jingyi watched as Li Jianyue got into the car. The next moment he met Li Mosen's dark gaze. Chapter 2239. It was obvious. Li Mosen was very hostile to him. Quan Jingyi looked at him with interest. He raised his eyebrows slightly and raised his chin. "Aren't you going to get in the car?" Li Jianyue, who was in the car, also heard this. She looked at Li Mosen and patted the seat beside her. "Brother Mosen, get in the car." Only then did Li Mosen retract his gaze. The cold warning aura on his body disappeared without a trace the moment he turned around. It was as if nothing had happened. Quan Jingyi watched the door close and the black car drive away. He began to have a terrible guess in his heart. When they met at the amusement park, Qin Shizhao had been thinking about Li Mosen for a long time, so she went to inquire about a lot of things early in the morning. Qin Shizhao was good at information channels. The information that she could say was usually true. Li Mosen was not the Li family's biological son. He had heard Qin Shizhao gossip before. And now, Li Mosen was obviously very hostile to him. And this hostility was not just because his sister was coveted and he wanted to protect her as an elder brother. But, as a man, it was the warning of a wolf when facing a rival in love. It had to be said that for a moment, Quan Jingyi was indeed attracted by Li Mosen. But he was not someone who would give up easily because of this. Quan Jingyi rode the bicycle and faced the evening wind. He was in a rare mood. It seemed that it had been a long time since he had been so challenging. If he really started dating Li Jianyue, what would Li Mosen's reaction be? He was looking forward to it. The car drove in the direction of Wuxia. It was not far and only took 10 minutes. However, Li Jianyue felt that this part of the road was a little troublesome. Looking at the comfortable middle-aged and elderly people around her, she felt uncomfortable. She fell onto Li Mosen's lap and said coquettishly, "When can our car be repaired?" Li Mosen looked at the girl on his lap with gentle eyes. He couldn't help but raise his hand and gently push the hair on her forehead away. He said gently, "Very soon. Let Uncle Yang repair it. It can be repaired today." Li Jianyue pouted and lowered her head to play with her fingers. She snorted and said, "What if it can't be repaired? Then let Uncle Yang buy us a new car." Li Mosen gently twirled his fingers around her soft hair and suddenly said, "How about a little electric donkey?" Li Jianyue's eyes lit up. "Can I? I want to ride on the electric scooter too. It's fast and saves energy." "Well, maybe we can also change to a motorcycle." Li Mosen looked at her face, which was similar to Su Qianxi's, and reached out to touch her eyelid. Li Jianyue blinked her eyes subconsciously. Her thick and long eyelashes brushed past his fingers, leaving a slight itch. Li Mosen's heart skipped a beat as he looked at her. His gaze moved from her eyes to her nose and finally to her lips. Plump and rosy, smooth and small, very beautiful. Li Jianyue blinked her eyes and looked at Li Mosen. "A motorcycle is fine too, but do you know how to drive one?" "Yes." "Let's change to a motorcycle then," Li Jianyue said as she lay on Li Mosen's lap and giggled. "A motorcycle is faster and very cool. Let's go home and ask Mom and Dad. If they agree, we'll change." When Li Jianyue heard this, her face suddenly fell. "You're so annoying. Mom and Dad will definitely say that it's dangerous." Chapter 2240. Li Jianyue's face was full of surprise. "Wow, that's great. Brother Mosen, you're so amazing." Li Mosen could clearly feel her admiration. The corners of his lips curled up. "Are you happy that I'm so amazing?" "Yes." Li Jianyue's eyes lit up. She looked at Li Mosen and said enviously, "If only I were half as smart as you and my brother." Li Mosen smiled. "You're already half as smart as I am. If you're not smart enough, let me make up for it with my intelligence." Li Jianyue was a little depressed. "But that's because you're smart, not because I'm smart. If I were as smart as you, I would definitely be better off than I am now. Look at Sister Pan Pan. She's so smart. Mom said that Sister Pan Pan inherited the intelligence of Uncle and Aunt Qingyu. That's why she's so outstanding. But I didn't inherit the intelligence of Mom and Dad. We're all born from the same parents. Why is my brother so smart? He thought that you and Daesu were twins and he sucked away all the nutrients in you, Li Mosen joked. When we get home, go beat him up. I'll help you beat him up until he's looking for his teeth all over the floor. Li Jianhua laughed out loud. Her eyes curved like crescent moons. She looked at Li Mosen and said, okay, then let's go back and do a mixed doubles later. Li Mosen smiled silently. He caressed her forehead and said, actually, you're very cute. Don't care what others say to you. Everyone has their own life. You're the little princess of our family. You don't have to be smart. You just have to be responsible for being cute and pretty. Li Jianhua felt happy when she heard that. She snorted lightly. That's right. I just have to be responsible for being cute and pretty. Yes, and then find a smart man to be your husband. Let him love and dote on you. Then you can live like this for the rest of your life and live happily ever after. In fact, Mommy is a very smart and independent person. Brother Mosen, did you know? I heard from Aunt Qingyu that when Mommy and Daddy were still young, Daddy went missing for a few years. At that time, Mommy had just gotten pregnant and Daddy disappeared. Mommy was the one who raised me and brother. At that time, she had to take care of a company by herself. At that time, the company was also very powerful. Mommy was really amazing. But after Daddy came back, Mommy didn't even have to wear her own clothes. Daddy was the one who dressed her. Li Jianhua's eyes were full of envy and longing. Ever since I was young, Dad rarely dressed me. She thought for a moment and said, but I'm fine. Dad doesn't even dress my older brother. Li Mosen felt a little sad when he heard this. Li Mosen had heard a lot about what Su Qianxi had experienced in the past. He knew that all these nightmares and tragedies originated from his biological mother. If it weren't for his biological mother, Li Xiqing wouldn't have gone missing. Su Qianxi wouldn't have had to bear so much on her own. Moreover, at that time, no matter how difficult and sad Su Qianxi was, she still went against everyone's opinion and adopted him. Now that he had grown up, he should repay this kind woman. Li Mosen caressed Li Jianhua's forehead and asked softly, you won't in the future. You will only enjoy all the happiness that your mother enjoyed. Chapter 2241. Okay, I think so too. Mommy and Daddy both said that although I'm not as smart as you and Big Brother, my luck has always been the best since I was young. Ever since I was very young, I often won the lottery. Plus, I have the best daddy, the best mommy, the best grandpa, grandma, and Big Brother. As she spoke, her eyes turned into crescents. She looked up at Li Mosen and said, and you? Li Mosen's eyes turned into crescents. Li Mosen's heart suddenly felt as if it had been injected with a warm current. He couldn't help but smile and said, yeah. We're here. Uncle Yang stopped the car and pulled the handbrake. Li Jianhua immediately got up and hurriedly opened the car door and got out. When Li Mosen saw her jumping up and down with her school bag on her back, his heart that had been depressed for the whole day finally cleared up. Li Jianxian realized that Li Mosen seemed to be in a good mood that day. Even when he went out for a night run, he was smiling. Yu Chulin also noticed Li Mosen's strange behavior. He couldn't help but smile and say, hey Mosen. Li Mosen turned around and looked at Yu Chulin. The faint smile on his face as well as his obvious good mood, made Yu Chulin recall the hostility Li Mosen had shown him previously. His smile deepened as he asked, do you want to play basketball? Sure. Li Mosen raised his eyebrows. Daesu, come along too. Li Jianxian was panting slightly from running. When he saw the intense atmosphere between them, he nodded his head. When Li Jianhua heard that they were going to play basketball after taking a shower, she ran out happily and squatted at the side to watch them. Su Qianxi and Li Xiqing also came out for a walk. At a glance, they saw the huge basketball court under the night sky. The three youths were sweating profusely and full of youthfulness. The smile on Su Qianxi's face was still gentle. She held her husband's arm and said, the children have all grown up. Li Xiqing only showed a gentle expression beside his wife. When he saw how happy Su Qianxi was, the corners of his lips curled up slightly and he said, they've all grown up. We can rest assured in the future. When Daesu graduates, let's leave the company to him and travel around the world. Su Qianxi glanced at him, slightly dissatisfied, and said, how old is Daesu now? Can't you let him play for another 2 years? How can that be? Children are meant to be used, Li Xiqing said seriously. Other than Ersu and Moyun, everyone else can be used. Li Jianhua's ears were sharp. When she heard this, she immediately stood up from the ground and shouted, "Dad, how can you say that? I can use it too. Although I'm only in my first year of high school, I'll be interning in the company in my junior year." Although Li Ersu was not very smart, she had been the cutest since she was a child, and she looked the most similar to Su Qianxi. In addition to the debt he owed her when they were young, among the 3 children of Li Xiqing, he doted on her the most. Now that he heard his daughter being so sensible, he actually felt a little gratified and couldn't help but smile. "You've grown up." Li Jianyue took it as a compliment and replied proudly, "Of course." Su Qianxi couldn't help but laugh. "Speaking of which, Mosin is going to take the college entrance examination this year. Have you asked him which university he's going to?" Li Jianyue replied, "Yes, he said he wanted to get into Kingstown University." Kingstown University was also the best key university in Kingstown. However, this key university was only in Kingstown. Chapter 2242. Hearing her daughter's words, Su Qianxi was a little surprised. Although Kingstown University was not bad, Mosin was more interested in physics, and Kingstown University was more famous for its chemistry department. She once thought that even if Mosin did not want to go abroad, he would probably go to Tsinghua University, Capital University, Fudan University, or the University of Science and Technology. Ursu's answer was far beyond her expectations. Su Qianxi was a little puzzled and asked, "He told you that?" "Yeah." Li Jianyue did not think there was anything wrong with it. She tilted her head and said, "He said that this way we don't have to live on campus and he can send me to school on his bicycle every day." Hee. Seeing her daughter's silly look, Su Qianxi couldn't help but laugh. "So you asked your brother to stay?" "No." Li Jianyue squeezed between her parents and inserted her hands into Li Xiqing's and Su Qianxi's arms. She said coquettishly, "It's obvious that brother can't bear to leave me, okay? Where can he find such a cute and beautiful sister like me?" Su Qianxi laughed out loud. "Well, you've completely inherited your father's thick skin." Li Xiqing's eyes flashed for a moment, but when he heard his lover's words, he did not feel that he was being scolded. Instead he said proudly, "That's good. This is the good quality of our Li family." Li Jianyue smiled and stayed in the middle of them. Looking at the 3 teenagers running on the basketball court, she shouted, "Go! Daddy and Mommy said they will take us for supper later." The 3 teenagers answered in unison, "Okay." Su Qianxi snorted and poked her daughter's nose. "Little rascal, what do you want to eat?" "Hey Leo." The basketball game ended quickly, and the 6 of them drove to the 24-hour Hey Leo hot pot restaurant. Before the dishes were served, Su Qianxi strictly controlled the quantity and warned them not to eat too much. But when the forecourt hot pot was served, she still couldn't control the teenagers' hands and accidentally exceeded their expectations. Seeing the dishes being served, Su Qianxi frowned and said, "Eat less or you won't be able to sleep later." "It's okay, tomorrow is the weekend." Li Jianyue was very excited. As she spoke, she took out her phone and took a beautiful photo. Then she showed it to her brother, who was being strictly controlled by his grandparents in the old house. "Beautiful Buddhist girl, little son. Picture, Fatty Li Moyun, Beautiful Buddhist girl, little son. Seduce, Fatty Li Moyun. How can you do this? I want to eat too. Beautiful Buddhist girl, little son. Spinning. Come on." Li Moyun's stomach growled as he looked at the picture of the hot pot. Qin Shuhua happened to hear it and asked with concern, "Is Moyun hungry? Grandma will make supper for you, okay?" The white-haired Li Xiao heard this and snorted. "No, he's already so fat. We can't let him have supper." Li Moyun was on the verge of tears and said pitifully, "Grandfather, I'm really hungry." Li Xiao said mercilessly, "You have to endure it even if you are hungry. Look at your body." Then she looked at Qin Shuhua and said, "It's all your fault. Look at how handsome he used to be. He looked like his father and mother at the same time. You fed him until he was deformed." Chapter 2243. Ding dong. Ding dong. Li Moyun lowered his head and a bunch of pictures popped up. "Buddhist beauty, little son. Voice, do you want to eat it? Come over. It's super delicious. There are 4 flavors. Tomato hot pot, 3 delicacies hot pot, butter hot pot and seafood hot pot. The beef is so delicious. It's fragrant and tender." Other than Li Jianyue's voice, there were also the voices of his parents and the people around them. Gulp. Li Moyun swallowed his saliva. Qin Shuhua's heart ached for him. "Eat a little. The child is used to it." If he doesn't eat, he'll be hungry at night. Li Moyun quickly nodded and looked at his grandfather pitifully. Li Xiao put on a straight face. Look at you. Are you really that hungry? Li Moyun continued to nod and muttered bitterly, I'm hungry. Li Xiao shook his head and said to Qin Shuhua, give him a hardtack. No. Li Moyun screamed. Grandpa, I want to eat delicious food. Look at my sister. She's sending me delicious food. He pointed the phone at Li Xiao's face and shouted, look, she's too much. Is she still your biological sister? Right at that moment, Li Jianyue sent another video over. In the video, Yu Chulin, Li Mosen, Li Jianqian and Su Qianxi were all there. In the middle of the video there was a steaming hot pot. One look and you could tell that it was the ultimate luxurious dish. The last scene was Li Jianyue turning the camera to herself. She smacked her lips at the camera and smacked her lips. Li Xiao smiled and said, why is our Ursu so good looking? Li Moyun was speechless. What kind of focus was that? Qin Shuhua also came over and watched the video again. She smiled and said, yes, Ursu is really good looking. She's the prettiest among the 3 children. Li Xiao felt the same way and nodded. He looked at Li Moyun and was even more disappointed. Look at what you're feeding him. Is he a pig? Li Maju was speechless. Li Xiao finally announced his death sentence. Give him a hardtack and prepare vegetarian food for school on Monday. He's not allowed to eat meat for a month. Li Moyun cried sadly, Grandpa, why do you despise me so much? Am I an orphan? Grandma, I don't want to be a vegetarian. I don't want to eat hardtack. Qin Shuhua's heart ached for Li Moyun, but when she saw how fat Li Moyun was, she sighed and said, hey, listen to your grandfather. Be good. Li Moyun was in despair. Under Li Xiao's angry glare, he held a piece of hardtack and a glass of water and bitterly swallowed the food with tears in his eyes. He looked at the delicious food that Li Jianyue had sent on the screen with envy and jealousy. Qin Shuhua's heart ached, but when she saw the scene she couldn't help but think it was funny. She took out her phone and secretly recorded a short video to post on WeChat. When Li Jianyue saw it, she laughed out loud and enthusiastically sent a video to Li Moyun. It was a live broadcast. Li Moyun cried out and roared with tears in his eyes, get lost. On the other hand, the room burst into laughter. Li Moyun decisively hung up the phone and cried in his bed. Li Jianyue's evil plan had succeeded. She naturally put her chopsticks into Li Mosen's dipping sauce and picked up a piece of meat that he had put down just a second ago. She happily put it into her mouth and smacked her lips. It's so delicious. Lazy bum, Li Mosen muttered. Chapter 2244. Li Jianrui didn't think there was anything wrong with it. She happily picked up Li Mosen's food with her chopsticks. Suddenly, Li Mosen threw a piece of tripe into the bowl. Li Jianrui said, hey, I don't want to eat this. Li Mosen continued to heat the food. When he heard this, he deliberately said, it's not for you. Then don't put it here. It smells. That's my bowl. Li Mosen deliberately glanced at her. Your bowl is over there. Oh, what's yours is mine. Yours is mine. Li Jianrui smiled and added the tripe. She dipped it in the sauce and sent it to his mouth. Ah, Li Mosen smiled and opened his mouth. He ate the tripe and then put the freshly cooked food into the bowl. Li Jianyue's hands were nimble. She put the food in her mouth as fast as she could. Suddenly, she saw that the waiter had served her favorite shrimp paste. She immediately tugged at Li Mosen and mumbled, Brother Mosen, I want to eat that. Li Jianqian couldn't stand it anymore. You only care about yourself. Mosen hasn't eaten much. Didn't I just feed him a bite? Li Jianrui said righteously. I saw him eat a few bites. Su Qianxi also looked at her daughter. Don't bully your brother. No, Li Jianrui ate and picked up the meatballs in the bowl. Brother Mosen likes to cook hot pot for me. He's not like that guy. He never cooks for me. Fake brother. Li Jianqian laughed. You have the nerve to say that. Isn't it because you like to stick to Mosen? Think about it. Have you ever cared about me? That's because you don't care about me. Only Brother Mosen cares about me, so I don't care about you. Li Jianrui said angrily. Brother Mosen is the best. You're all bad. Mom, you eat too. Li Jianrui scooped up a piece of freshly cooked shrimp paste and put it in Su Qianxi's bowl. Brother Mosen is delicious. When Li Mosen heard this, his blue eyes quietly deepened. Brother Mosen is delicious. Hey, speak clearly. What do you mean Brother Mosen is delicious? Li Jianqian took advantage of the loophole in her words. Li Jianqian then realized what she had said and said confidently, Brother Mosen's cooking is delicious. If you can cook for me, I will also say that your cooking is delicious. Forget it. Li Jianqian waved his hand. Then you continue to follow Mosen. Mosen don me? Umph. Li Jianyue continued to eat happily. Li Mosen was obviously in a good mood as well. He said, at least leave a few mouthfuls for me. Yeah, I'm full. Li Jianyue drank a cup of sour plum juice and was satisfied. Ah, it's so delicious. Su Qianxi couldn't help smiling and said, you only know how to bully your brother for being honest. Yu Chulin had been a man of few words from the beginning until the end. When he heard this, he subconsciously looked up at Li Mosen. Then he looked at Li Xiqing, who had also been silent. At this time, Li Xiqing was eating with his eyes down, putting everything in the bowl between him and Su Qianxi. His eyes were dark. No one knew what he was thinking. After supper, Li Jianrui accidentally ate too much. She dragged Li Mosen's arm and walked with difficulty. Ah, it's so uncomfortable. Chapter 22:45. I don't want to go. I want to sleep. Li Jianyue cried and hugged Li Mosen's arm, looking aggrieved. Li Xiqing and Su Qianxi had already walked far away. Yu Chulin and Li Jianxian had always disliked them for being too slow, so they had long walked away. At this time, only Li Mosen and Li Jianyue were left behind. This was not the first time this scene had appeared, but every time, Li Mosen had a strange sense of happiness. Especially when the little girl acted coquettishly in front of him, the sense of satisfaction in his heart could not be replaced by anything. Under the street light, the little girl's fair and tender face was full of exhaustion. Li Mosen looked at her and then at the few people in front of him. He pursed his lips and said, do you want to become like Moyun? Li Jianyue whimpered and hugged Li Mosen's arm. She finally resigned herself to her fate and stood up. However, she still half collapsed on him and stumbled as she said, if I had known, I wouldn't have eaten so much. It's all your fault. You cooked the food so well and made the sauce so good. You caused me to accidentally eat too much. Ugh. Li Mosen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You're blaming me? It's your fault, it's your fault. Li Mosen was helpless. He looked down at her, his eyes full of love. Then what about you? Next time I'll have to work hard to keep an eye on you. I definitely can't let you eat too much. Oh, Li Jianyue pursed her lips and said vaguely, up to you. He said the same last time. This time he still cooked a lot for her to eat. Big liar. However, Li Jianyue felt that she was kind, so she definitely couldn't ruin his heroic words at this time. Otherwise he wouldn't cook next time. Li Jianyue thought that she had calculated it well, but in fact, Li Mosen had long noticed that her eyes were rolling around. Li Mosen saw that the smile in his eyes deepened. It was actually quite good to continue like this. Finally they got on the car and reached home. Li Jianyue was no longer that tired on the way back. Now she went back to her room happily. Li Mosen was about to go upstairs when he suddenly heard Su Qianxi call out, Mosen? Li Mosen stopped in his tracks and looked at Su Qianxi. He called out, Mom? Su Qianxi stood at the door of the hallway and said, come to your father's study. Li Mosen felt inexplicably nervous. Ever since he was a kid, Li Xiqing had always been strict with him. This kind of strictness was different from the strictness he used on Li Jianxian and Li Jianyue. Although he would also be fierce and scold his children, and he would even hit them when they were disobedient to Li Jianxian. However, he had never concealed his love and tolerance for them. He would always be a little more patient with them. In the end, there was still a layer of separation between them. Li Mosen was well aware of this. Therefore, over the years he had made his position very clear. He was not close to Li Xiqing, so Li Xiqing rarely asked him to go to his study. At this time, hearing Su Qianxi's words, Li Mosen's heart couldn't help but beat faster. Li Mosen nodded and followed Su Qianxi into Li Xiqing's study. Su Qianxi let him in and closed the door. Li Xiqing was sitting at the desk in the study, sorting out the paintings that Su Qianxi had drawn 2 days ago. Chapter 22:46. Okay. Li Xiqing answered and carefully put the pile of paintings into the drawer. Sit down. I want to talk to you. Li Mosen became even more nervous. Such a scene had happened before, but without exception, every time it happened it felt different. This time, Li Xiqing seemed to be a little serious, making it impossible not to tense up and treat him seriously. Li Mosen sat down on the chair in front of Li Xiqing's table. His posture was standard and his back was straight. Li Xiqing knew that he had become used to it, so he didn't care and said, I heard that you want to get into Kingstown University? Li Mosen had told Li Jianyue about this before, so he wasn't surprised that he knew. He nodded calmly and said, Yes, Dad. I want to get into Kingstown University and stay in Kingstown. You should know that with your qualifications and talent, staying in Kingstown University is a bit of a waste. Li Xiqing looked at him with his sharp eyes. Li Mosen couldn't help but straighten his back and said, I don't want to leave Kingstown. What? Because I grew up in Kingstown. I can't bear to leave. Li Xiqing listened to this and didn't say anything. Just then Su Qinxi made a few cups of calming tea and brought them over. Inexplicably, she felt that the way this father and son interacted was a bit stiff. She quietly brought the tea over and sat next to Li Xiqing, waiting for them to continue the conversation. Qian, Li Xiqing suddenly said, help me close the door. Su Qinxi felt that something was wrong, but she still went to close the door. The moment the door was closed, she heard Li Xiqing's voice. Do you not want to leave Kingstown, or do you not want to leave Ursu? Li Mosen's heart suddenly felt like it was being fiercely grabbed by something. In just a moment, Li Mosen's back was already covered with a thin layer of sweat. And Su Qinxi was so smart that she immediately understood what he was implying. Her heart was beating fast, and she immediately turned around and looked at Li Xiqing in disbelief. At this moment, Li Xiqing's eyes were sharp as he stared at Li Mosen. The aura of being in a high position for many years was completely revealed at this moment. Even she herself could not quite withstand such coercion. What's more, Mosen was just a child. At this moment, Li Mosen was looking at Li Xiqing in shock. He quickly lowered his eyes to hide his panic and asked, Dad, is there anything different? Li Mosen lowered his blue eyes and clenched his fists. But he knew that he looked too guilty now. Under the pressure of Li Xiqing, the secret that she had kept in her heart for so many years had nowhere to hide. She frowned, walked over to him and patted him on the shoulder. Li Xiqing then calmed down a bit. Li Mosen finally felt that he had some breathing space, but at this time the palms of his hands and the back of his back were already oozing sweat, and even his forehead had completely exposed his nervousness. He knew that he was finished. Sure enough, he heard Li Xiqing say, You knew since you were young that you were not Ursu's biological brother, right? Mosen pursed his lips. Of course he knew. He had known since he was young. Everyone around him was reminding him that he was not Li Xiqing's biological child. He was just a product of a woman who had committed the most heinous crime and messed around in a foreign country. Chapter 2247. It was for the sake of living a good life in this family. He wanted to integrate into this family and become a real member of this family. He didn't dare to reveal his thoughts about Li Jianyue, for fear that Li Xiqing would drive him away and separate him from Ursu. Li Mosen had been safe and sound for so many years. He didn't expect to be discovered by Li Xiqing at this time. Li Mosen's heart was beating extremely fast. In his memory, he had only felt such fear when he was 5 or 6 years old, when he was held hostage by that crazy woman, Tang Menjing, and his life was hanging by a thread. At this time, such emotions once again shrouded his heart, making it difficult for him to adapt. Li Xiqing saw that he didn't speak and already had an answer in his heart. He said meaningfully, Mosen. Li Mosen grabbed his thigh with both hands and his heart was already clear. Li Xiqing knew. He knew everything. How could a smart person like Li Xiqing not be able to guess? Li Mosen's heart was filled with despair, but when he heard Li Xiqing's voice, he simply raised his head and said, Dad, I do know that I am not your biological child, so I don't want to leave Kingstown. I didn't ask you to leave, Li Xiqing interrupted him. I just think that you should have a more suitable choice. Go abroad or go to a better university in the country. You can choose. Staying in Kingstown will only waste your talent. No, Mosen, Su Qinxi said in a gentle voice, listen to your father. Li Mosen was silent, but on his fair skin, his Adam's apple had already moved up and down a few times. Li Xiqing continued, You are too close to Ursu. Maybe even you don't know what your feelings for her are. I suggest you go abroad for a few years to calm down. Li Mosen panicked and said, No, Dad, I only have feelings for Ursu, like a brother and sister. You are not. Li Xiqing's eyes were like an eagle, firmly grasping him as if he could see through his internal organs. All his secrets had been seen through by him. She frowned and said, Ursu has been relying on Mosen since she was young, and Mosen is used to Ursu's pampering. Their relationship is indeed better, but they grew up together, so it's only right that they have a good relationship. What do you think? Yes, we should have a good relationship, but there's something wrong with the look in his eyes, Li Xiqing said with certainty. His voice gradually became stern. Mosen, Ursu only sees you as her brother. She's still very innocent now. She doesn't know anything, so she can't understand the emotions in your eyes. As he spoke, he stood up and quietly approached her. I'm a man. Of course I know what you mean when you look at her. That wasn't the way an older brother looked at his younger sister. Instead, it was the way a man would look at a woman he adored. He was an experienced person, so he naturally knew what was going on. Li Mosen was indeed outstanding, smart, well-behaved, hardworking, and eager to learn. But even so, she was not good enough for Li Xiqing's only daughter. Li Mosen panicked and sat on the chair as if his soul had been sucked out of him. After all, he was the child that he had raised. Seeing Li Mosen like this, Li Xiqing's eyes softened. He said meaningfully, Mosen, you are still young and outstanding enough. Dad will recommend you to a professor at New York Business School. I'll give you a few years to calm down. Mosen is the older brother. Are you sure you want Mosen to be with Ursu? Are you sure? Chapter 2248. New York Business School. I'll give you a few years. Calm down. Every word echoed in Li Mosen's mind several times. The echoes shook him to the brink of collapse. Li Mosen stood up abruptly and shouted, I don't want to go, Dad, I want to stay in Kingstown. It would be a waste of your talent to stay in Kingstown. Li Xiqing's eyes turned cold again. He looked at Li Mosen in front of him and said coldly, You are very talented in physics. You can choose an excellent physics school or you can go directly to my alma mater. I will arrange the best education for you. Li Mosen wanted to say something, but then Su Qianxi came forward and gently held him. Her voice was soft and comforting as she said, Mosen, your father is doing this for your own good. Calm down first. There was a moment of silence. Then Li Mosen's voice was almost cold and emotionless. It was eerily calm. He asked, For my own good? His voice was cold and very stiff. Su Qianxi was shocked by Li Mosen's behavior. She held him and stood beside him. She didn't know when this child had grown up, even to the point where she needed to look up to him. Su Qianxi was slightly shocked. She reached out and gently comforted him. Yes, Mosen, Dad and Mom are doing this for your own good. Your father just doesn't want your talent to be buried. Don't give him excuses. Li Mosen gently pushed Su Qianxi away and looked at Li Xiqing coldly. Do you not want me to be buried, or do you not want your daughter to be coveted by the son of your enemy? Li Xiqing's face suddenly darkened. What did you say? Li Mosen met Li Xiqing's eyes and instinctively lowered his eyes. But in the next moment, Li Mosen realized what he was doing. He was slightly startled. He lowered his head and clenched his fists. He said in a low voice, I know who my biological mother is. I know that woman destroyed your family back then. Since I was a child, people around me have always reminded me that I can have everything I have today because of my mother's kindness. I can stand here because my mother saved my life twice from that woman. Li Mosen suddenly laughed sarcastically. He looked at the intricate carpet under his feet and said in a low voice, I've been your son for so many years. Now, I don't want to be your son now, Dad. But before he said anything, Su Qianxi covered his mouth. Su Qianxi's hands had a faint aroma of tea, mixed with her unique scent, forming a mother's scent. Li Mosen's eyes trembled, and he lowered his head to meet Su Qianxi's gaze. Su Qianxi was now 40 years old, but the years still left no trace on her face. Her face was 80% similar to Li Jianyue's. Su Qianxi's eyes were a little watery. With a little fear, she shouted at him, Mosen. Calling his name, she burst into tears. Li Mosen was shocked. It was only then that he realized how hurtful his words were. Li Xiqing's masseter muscles were twisted. He quickly walked over and pulled Su Qianxi over. Looking at the young man in front of him, who was already comparable to his height, Li Xiqing said in a slow voice, Continue. Su Qianxi's voice was already trembling. Mosen, whether it is in the past or now to us, you are no different from Desu and Ursu. Chapter 2249. Su Qianxi's voice was a little loud, and it poured into Li Mosen's ears. He was stunned and then fell silent. Li Xiqing looked at the child in front of him who he had raised with his own hands and narrowed his eyes. What? Are you done? Li Mosen pursed his lips and clenched his fists. He nodded at Li Xiqing. I'm done. Li Xiqing reached out and patted Su Qianxi beside him. He said word by word, Since you're done, go back to sleep. Li Mosen clenched his fists even tighter. He bowed slightly to them and turned to leave. Just at the moment when he turned the door handle, Su Qianxi stopped him. Mosen. Li Mosen paused. Su Qianxi suddenly felt a little sad and whispered, No one doesn't want their child to be good. You are our child. What your father just said to you is the best plan. You are too young now and don't know what you want. What you need most now is not our affirmation but calmness. After a period of time, you will think through a lot of things. Li Mosen listened to this and paused. He finally turned the door handle and took a step forward. It was not. They did not know what he wanted at all. He liked Ursu not because he was impulsive. Ever since he was young he was well aware of his own background. Therefore he wanted to repay the favor by doing something that he could do within his abilities. But he did not know when he started to be obsessed with this feeling of being needed. The innocent and lovely Ursu always looked at him with her round eyes and smiled. She called him obediently and cutely, Brother Mosen, I want this. Brother Mosen is the best, Brother Mosen is of course the best person. I like Brother Mosen the most. Mosen walked up the stairs absent-mindedly. When he thought of Ursu's face, the gloominess on his face lessened slightly. Even his gaze softened. And at this moment, there was a slight sound of the door opening upstairs. Li Jianrui's little head popped out. When she saw Li Mosen she blinked and said, Brother Mosen, what's wrong? Why did Dad ask you to go? When Li Mosen saw Li Jianue's innocent and adorable face, the gloomy look on his face disappeared the moment he saw her. He walked up to her and gently pressed her head. Why aren't you asleep yet? Although Li Jianue was clumsy and her reaction was a little slow, at this moment she could also sense Mosen's unhappiness. What's wrong? Did Daddy scold you? Li Mosen's gaze softened. He looked at her and nudged her. Let's go in first. Let's talk inside. Li Jianue quickly jumped back and then opened the door to let him in. When Li Mosen came in he wanted to close the door, but in the next moment, a wave of bitterness poured into his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he opened the door and walked in. On the other hand, Li Jianue was a little surprised. Hey, why didn't you close the door? As he spoke he walked up and closed the door behind him. Then he turned around and jumped back to his bed. What's wrong? What do you want to talk to me about? The soft little mattress trembled as she sat down. It looked soft. Li Mosen said, If I go abroad, will you miss me? Chapter 2250. Li Jinrui's big eyes were filled with questions. She looked at him and realized that Li Mosen had an indescribable feeling today. There was an indescribable emotion in his deep gaze. Li Jinrui's heart felt slightly lifted. She was actually a little nervous. Is that so? Li Mosen did not answer. Instead he asked, Do you want me to go abroad? Do you want me to go abroad? Do you want me to? Perhaps even Li Mosen himself did not realize that at this moment, his hand was already on his knee. A pair of eyes were staring straight at Li Jianrui. The anticipation in his eyes had almost turned into desire, forcing her to give him the answer that he longed for deeply in his heart. Li Jianrui also noticed that there was something wrong with Li Mosen's gaze, but she was not afraid. Instead, she tilted her head and said, I don't want you to go abroad, but I know that with Brother Mosen's intelligence and ability, you can definitely stand higher and further. A small Kingstown can't restrict you. Li Mosen had originally thought that with Li Jianrui's usual temperament, she would only say yes or no. However, the words that came after were exactly the same as what Li Xiqing had said. Li Mosen did not know what he was feeling at this moment. He looked at her and quietly loosened his fists. Suddenly he clenched them tightly. Looking at her, his gaze unconsciously deepened. He asked softly, So, do you also think that I should leave? Li Jianrui noticed Mosen's unhappiness and immediately shook her head. She said, This is not leaving. How can this be considered as leaving? You see, Brother has been studying in the capital for so many years. But in my heart, Brother will always be Brother. Although he went to the north to study, which is very far away from me, I also know that the education in Kingstown is not as good as that in the capital. Even the best school is unable to develop Brother's talent. That's why Dad and Mom sent Brother to the capital back then. No, they just want Daesu to spend more time with your grandparents. Li Mosen's tone was very firm, and he believed it without a doubt. No, it's not what you think. It's one thing for Grandpa and Grandma to want someone to accompany them. That's just one factor. But Dad's biggest plan is to give Brother the best education. Look, if Dad and Mom hadn't sent Brother to Kingstown back then, he wouldn't have become the youngest master's student in the world of scientific research. Now, the best scientific research in the country is in Kingstown. That's why Dad let Brother and Brother Chu come back to study. Li Mosen had never thought of this, nor had he heard anyone mention it. He had thought many times that Yu Chulin and Li Jianxian were homesick and wanted to stay in Kingstown. That was why they had used the best excuse to come back to Kingstown for scientific research. Li Xiqing just acquiesced. But now Li Jianyue told him that in fact, Li Xiqing and Su Qianxi had already arranged everything tacitly. Li Mosen recalled that when he was very young, Li Xiqing had asked him more than once, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" At that time, Li Mosen was still young, and his answer was different every time. Sometimes, his answer was that he wanted to be a scientist because scientists were great. Sometimes, his answer was that he wanted to be a doctor because he didn't want illness to torture humans. Later, Li Mosen asked him again, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.